Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I used to work the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner just off the highway, the kind of place where truckers stop for coffee and night owls order pancakes at 3 AM. You see a lot of weird things when most people are asleep. But one customer still haunts me. It was a slow night, maybe around 2:30 AM, when this woman walked in. She looked old, but not just in the way most elderly people do. Something about her felt ancient, like she'd been walking the earth for centuries. Her hair was thin and wispy, her eyes were clouded but alert. Her skin looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. She moved slowly, carefully, but with a strange purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the booth in the back corner, the one nobody ever sat in. I came over with my notepad. Coffee, I asked. She just nodded. Do you want any food? She smiled then, just barely. Her lips were cracked and dry, but her teeth, what was left of them, were strangely sharp. Not tonight, she whispered. I got the coffee, set it down, and started to walk away. But then she said something that made me stop cold. You always take your break at 3:10 AM, don't you? I turned. I had never seen this woman before. How do you know that? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. I've been coming here a long time, she said, stirring her coffee slowly. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask if she was a regular, but something in my gut told me that was wrong. I knew all the regulars. I went back behind the counter and tried to shake it off, but I kept sneaking glances at her. She wasn't drinking the coffee, just staring into it, watching it ripple like she was waiting for something to appear in it. And then, at exactly 3:10 AM, she stood up. I didn't even realize the time had passed, but when I looked at the clock above the kitchen, it was 3:10 on the dot. She didn't say anything, just reached into her pocket and left something on the table before walking out the door. I waited until she was gone before I went to check. She hadn't left any money, no tip, just a small, folded piece of paper. I'd opened it and my heart dropped. It was a receipt from our diner, but the date at the top was 20 years ago to the day, and at the bottom, where the cashier's name was printed, it was my name. But the thing is, I hadn't been working here 20 years ago. I would have been a kid. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. I turned toward the door, expecting to see her silhouette outside, but she was gone, just vanished into the night. I stood there, staring at the empty table, my breath caught in my throat. The receipt crinkled in my shaking hands. No way, I whispered under my breath. I needed an explanation. Maybe one of the older employees knew something. I grabbed my coworker, Rick, who had been working here for nearly 30 years. He was the kind of guy who had seen everything. Drunks, fights, even the occasional attempted robbery. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. I handed him the receipt. Look at the date, I said. Rick squinted, rubbing his eyes. He was in his late 50s and had a permanent air of exhaustion. Weird, he muttered. Do you remember who worked here back then? This name. I pointed to my own name printed at the bottom. Did someone with my name work here? Rick let out a dry chuckle. You messing with me? No, just look at it. Rick's face darkened. He flipped the receipt over like he was expecting to find some logical explanation on the back. Then, after a long moment, he sighed. Shit, what? I asked, my stomach twisting. She handed it back to me. I remember that night. His voice was quieter than usual, which unsettled me. Rick was loud and gruff by nature. This was a different Rick. 20 years ago, a girl worked here, night shift, just like you. She had her name, same spelling and everything. Looked kinda like you too. Now that I think about it, it freaked me out a little when you first got hired, but I never thought much of it. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. What happened to her? Rick exhaled slowly. She disappeared. I swallowed hard. Disappeared. Yep. One night, she took her break at 3:10 AM, just like you do. She went out back to smoke, and she never came back. No struggle, no witnesses. Just gone. The only thing left was a half-full cup of coffee on the counter. I felt my blood turn to ice. Did they ever find her? I managed to choke out. Rick shook his head. Cops looked for weeks, but there was nothing. No leads. Just nothing. I turned and stared at the empty booth in the back. The woman who was just here. You saw her, right? Rick furrowed his brows. What woman? My stomach dropped. The old woman, the one who sat in the back booth. The one who left this. I waved the receipt in his face. Rick's expression didn't change. Kid, you've been standing here for the last 10 minutes, staring at that empty booth like you saw a damn ghost. I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out. Rick turned back toward the kitchen, muttering something about sleep deprivation. I was left standing there, gripping that 20-year-old receipt with my name on it. And then, from outside in the parking lot, I heard a sound. A soft, whispery voice. Break time, and it was coming from the alley behind the diner, where she had disappeared. Where I took my break, the air suddenly felt thick, like something unseen was pressing against me. My legs locked up, but my instinct screamed, "Don't go out there." Instead, I backed away from the door, gripping the counter for support. Then, for the first time in my life, I broke routine. I didn't take my break at 3:10 a.m. that night, and I never did again. After that night, things started to feel different, not in an obvious way, but in the way reality feels just a little off. Like I was walking through a dream that didn't belong to me. For the next few shifts, nothing outright creepy happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Every time I passed the back alley door, I felt my skin prickle like there was something waiting just beyond the threshold. I started avoiding that side of the diner altogether. I wouldn't even take out the trash after dark. Then, exactly a week later, something happened. It was another slow night, just past 3 a.m. when the front door chime jingled. I turned, expecting a trucker or maybe one of the usual graveyard shift workers from the gas station down the road. Instead, she walked in. The old woman. She looked exactly the same, thin, frail, her eyes clouded but sharp. But this time, she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her was another woman, younger, maybe mid-20s. She had long dark hair, pale skin, and something about her looked unfinished, like a painting someone had started but never completed. Her features weren't quite right. Her eyes were too wide, her lips too thin. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like she was learning how to use her body. And the worst part, she looked just like me. Not exactly, but close enough that my stomach twisted into knots. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The old woman walked straight to the same booth in the back corner. The not quite me followed silently, sitting stiffly across from her. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, my mind screaming at me to run, to wake up, to do something. Then, the old woman turned her head and locked eyes with me. "You didn't take your break last week." Her voice was dry, brittle. The younger woman, the one that looked like me, slowly tilted her head. Her mouth stretched into a small, unnatural smile. "That wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. The old woman sighed and stirred her coffee, just like before. "You've changed things," she muttered, almost to herself. The not quite me kept staring, her expression never changing. I felt something pressing down on me, something heavy and invisible, like the air itself was trying to suffocate me. And then, the old woman slid something across the table, a folded piece of paper, just like last time. "Take it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed not to touch it, but my hand moved anyway. With shaking fingers, I picked up the paper and slowly unfolded it. It was another receipt. Same date, same diner, but this one had tomorrow's date at the top, and at the bottom, where my name should have been, and it was blank. I looked up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but the booth was empty. The old woman and her unsettling companion were just gone. The door hadn't chimed. I hadn't looked away, but somehow they had disappeared. The receipt felt ice cold in my hands. I turned and ran straight to the back, bursting into the kitchen where Rick was washing dishes. "She was here," I gasped. Rick looked up, confused. "Who?" I shoved the receipt at him. "Who?" "The old woman, and there was someone else this time, and someone that looked like me, but not me. And she said I changed something." Rick frowned, taking the paper, but when he looked at it, his expression changed. His face went pale. His hand started to shake. "Where the hell did you get this?" "She left it," I said breathlessly. Rick's eyes darted to the back alley door. His jaw clenched. Then, to my horror, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the front of the diner. "You need to leave." "Now, what?" "To help it. Called out sick. Do not come back tomorrow." "Why, Rick, what is happening?" He didn't answer. He just shoved the receipt back at me and opened the door. "Get out of here, kid." I hesitated for only a second before bolting to my car. I didn't sleep that night, and I sure as hell didn't come in for my shift the next day. The next night, I got a call from my manager. Rick was gone, vanished, just like the girl 20 years ago. No struggle, no signs of forced entry, just God. The only thing they found, an untouched cup of coffee sitting in the back booth, and a new receipt lying on the table. This time, the bottom wasn't blank. It had Rick's name on it, and scrawled in shaky handwriting just above it. My parents were going to a wedding out of town and had arranged for a babysitter to stay with me overnight. It wasn't someone we'd used before, but she came recommended by a friend of my mom's. Her name was Melody. She arrived around 6 p.m., just as my parents were leaving. She was young, maybe early 20s, and very quiet. She didn't seem unfriendly, just like she had long dark hair, parted in the middle, and wore a baggy sweater that looked too big for her. I remember my mom chatting with her before they left, but Melody barely responded, just nodding and saying okay in a soft voice. voice. When my parents left, she stood by the door for a long time before turning to me and asking, "What do you usually do at night?" That was the first red flag. Most babysitters came in with ideas, movies, games, snacks, but Melody just stood there. I told her I usually watched TV and then went to bed by 10. She nodded and sat down on the couch while I put on a movie. Here's where it started getting weird. She didn't watch the movie. She just sat there staring at me, not in a scary way at first, just like she was zoning out. But after a while, I started feeling uncomfortable. "Do you want to watch something else?" I asked. She blinked, like she just remembered where she was. "No," she said. I tried to ignore it, but every time I glanced at her, she was still looking at me. Around 8 p.m., I told her I was going to get a snack from the kitchen. She nodded but didn't move. When I came back with a bowl of popcorn, she was gone. The couch was empty. I frowned and looked around. Melody, no answer. I checked the hallway, the bathroom, nothing. The front door was locked, and my parents' room was closed. But when I walked past my bedroom, I stopped. The door was open, and I was sure I had left it closed. I peeked inside. Melody was standing in the middle of my room. She wasn't looking at anything, just standing there, facing my bed. Her arms were hanging at her sides, completely still. I felt a chill go through me. "What are you doing?" I asked. She turned her head slowly, but not all the way, just enough that I could see her face in profile. "Just checking," she said. "Checking what?" She didn't answer. I wanted to run downstairs, but I didn't want to turn my back on her. After a few seconds, she walked past me without a word and sat back down on the couch. I tried to act normal, but my heart was racing. Something was really wrong with this girl. At 9:30, I decided to go to bed early and lock my door. I said goodnight, and she just nodded again. I locked my bedroom door and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound of the house made me jump. I kept picturing Melody standing in my room again, staring at nothing. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a soft noise, a creaking sound, like someone was walking outside my door. My heart pounded. I stared at the door, barely breathing. Then, the doorknob turned. I sat up straight. The door was locked, but I could see the knob twisting back and forth, slowly, like someone was testing it. I wanted to scream for my parents, but they weren't home. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like an hour before I finally fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, my bedroom door was open. I knew I locked it. I got up, heart pounding, and looked down the hall. The couch was empty. Melanie was gone. I ran to check the front door. It was still locked. My parents weren't supposed to be home until noon, so I had no idea how she had left. When my parents got back, my mom asked how everything went. I told her what happened, and she got this weird look on her face. She immediately called the friend who had recommended Melanie. Here's the part that still haunts me. Her friend had never recommended anyone named Melanie. She had no idea who I was talking about. We never found out who she really was or how she got into our house. My mom swore she had spoken to someone on the phone who claimed to be the sitter, but when she tried calling the number back, it was disconnected. That night, after my parents got home and I told them everything, I refused to sleep in my room. My dad checked the house thoroughly, every window, every door, every closet, but there was no sign of a break-in. She must have left before you woke up, he said. Maybe she had her own key. That didn't make sense, though. My parents had never given her one. My mom was more unsettled than my dad. She kept replaying the phone call in her head, swearing up and down that she had spoken to a woman who said she was a babysitter, but the number was dead, and their friend was adamant that she had never recommended anyone named Melanie. At some point, we just had to let it go. My parents told me I could sleep on the couch for the next few nights if it made me feel better. It did, kind of, but 2 nights later, something happened that made me never want to be alone in that house again. I was sleeping on the couch when I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was a dream. It was soft, almost rhythmic, but as my brain caught up, I realized what it was. Footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, coming from upstairs. My stomach dropped. My parents were both asleep in their room, and no one else was supposed to be in the house. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps moved down the hallway, past my old bedroom, past the bathroom, towards the stairs. Then they stopped. I stared at the staircase, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing, just silence. Then, suddenly, a quiet creak, the first step on the stairs. I panicked. My whole body felt like it was frozen in place, but my mind was screaming at me to move. My parents' room was upstairs, and I did not want to go up there. Instead, I grabbed the landline phone next to the couch and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered almost immediately. 911, what's your emergency? I tried to keep my voice steady. Someone's in my house. Are you alone? No, my parents are here, but they're asleep. I think someone's coming down the stairs. The operator's voice was calm but firm. Stay where you are. Are the doors locked? Yes. Do you say anyone. I stared at the staircase, barely blinking. No, but I heard it. Then, right as I said that, another creak. They were coming closer. The operator told me to stay on the line. She asked for my address, which I gave her in a whisper, but I felt like I was going to be sick. I knew someone was up there. I knew it. Then, silent. The footsteps had stopped. I waited, breathless, heart pounding. Nothing. After a few minutes, I heard sirens outside. I ran to the front door and let the cops in, my whole body shaking. 2 officers swept the house while another stayed with me. My parents woke up to the sound of the officers moving around and came downstairs, confused and half asleep. What's going on? My dad asked, rubbing his eyes. I heard someone in the house. I told him. They were coming down the stairs. The officers checked everything, windows, closets, even the attic. But again, they found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of anyone being inside. But then one of the officers came down from checking my old bedroom, looking uneasy. You said you locked your bedroom door that night the babysitter was here, right? I nodded. He glanced at his partner, then back at me. The lock on the inside was broken. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? It looks like someone messed with it from the inside. The latch is bent, like it was forced open. A cold wave of nausea hit me. That door had been locked, which meant that someone had been in my room after I went to sleep, and they had broken the lock to get out. I felt dizzy. The officers did one more sweep but found nothing. They told us to call again if we noticed anything strange. After they left, my parents tried to reassure me, saying maybe it had been an old lock that had finally given out. But I knew better. Melanie, or whoever she was, had been inside that room with me, not just standing there like I had seen. She had been inside. After that night, I refused to sleep alone. My dad, still skeptical, changed my bedroom lock the next day, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back in there. For a while, things were quiet. My parents chalked it up to paranoia. My mom, though shaken by the babysitter ordeal, told herself it had just been some strange miscommunication, maybe someone pretending to be a babysitter for some weird reason. But the police didn't find any evidence of a break-in, and that was enough for them to move on. My mom ran it in home daycare during the day, and we had a baby monitor set up in one of the guest rooms for nap time. It was an older model, just audio, no video. One afternoon, I was in the living room doing homework while my mom was busy with the kids. The monitor was on, broadcasting soft breathing from the sleeping toddlers in the guest room, and then the static started. At first, I didn't think much of it. Baby monitors were known to pick up interference. But then I heard something else. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible over the crackling static, but I heard it. I sat up, staring at the monitor speaker. Another whisper, then a giggle. My blood turned to ice. The guest room door was closed. No one else was in there. I slowly stood up, creeping toward the hallway. The monitor was still on, still crackling, but the whispering had stopped. I reached for the doorknob, and then, through the monitor, I heard a slow, deliberate knock, coming from inside the guest room. I ran. I nearly tripped over a chair trying to get to my mom. Mom, there's someone in the guest room. I shouted. She immediately got up, confused but alarmed by my panic. She grabbed the guest room key from the kitchen drawer and unlocked the door. The room was empty. The kids were still sleeping soundly, undisturbed. But something was wrong. The closet door was open. My maid frowned. I swear I closed that. She muttered. I stared at the closet, my pulse hammering. I knew something had been in here. I knew what I had heard. But there was nothing. My mom checked the closet. Nothing inside but extra blankets and pillows. No signs of forced entry. No weird footprints. And yet, the baby monitor was still on, still whispering. She turned it off. We never used it again. After that, things started happening more frequently. We'd wake up to find the kitchen chairs pulled away from the table. The faucets would turn on in the middle of the night. My mom found the pantry door open one morning with a single can of soup placed neatly on the floor in the center. My dad tried to brush it off. Maybe the cat knocked it down. But we didn't have a cat. Then, one morning, I noticed something new. A small, black smudge on my bedroom ceiling. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was dust or a cobweb. But when I checked the next morning, the smudge had grown, and it looked like a fingerprint. I grabbed a chair and got closer. It was a long, dark streak, almost like soot. I wiped at it with my sleeve, but it wouldn't come off. That night, I barely slept, and in the morning, there were more of the handprints scattered across my ceiling, like something had been crawling up there. That was the final straw. My mom called a locksmith to install new deadbolts and extra security. My dad, still reluctant to admit anything weird was happening, suggested maybe we had a mold problem. But I knew it wasn't mold. Something had gotten into our house. Something had been let out of my bedroom that night. And then the worst thing happened. 3 nights after the handprints appeared, I woke up to the sound of my name. It was a whisper, soft, drawn out, coming from inside my room. Jad as Saboon. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. It came again, closer. Jad as Saboon. It was her voice. Melody. I couldn't take it. I lunged out of bed, ran straight to my parents' room, and woke them up in a frenzy. My mom mom saw how pale I was and didn't even question it. She let me sleep in their room that night. When we checked my bedroom the next morning, the handprints were gone. We put the house up for sale a month later. It took a while, but eventually someone bought it. I don't know if they ever experienced anything weird. I never asked. To this day, I still don't know who or what Melanie really was. But sometimes I have dreams about her. She's standing in my old room. At the time, I was living in a small but old apartment complex in a quiet part of town. The building had a lot of history, originally built in the 1940s, later converted into apartments in the 72nds. The walls were thin, the floors creaky, and if someone so much as coughed down the hall, you'd hear it. I lived alone in a one-bedroom on the second floor, directly above a young couple. They were quiet, polite, and barely made any noise except the occasional murmur of their TV. Across the hall was an elderly woman named Mrs. Landry. Sweet lady, but she always had this distant, sorrowful look in her eyes. It started on a Wednesday night. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard a child crying. At first, I assumed it was coming from a neighboring unit, but it sounded hollow, distant, almost like it was coming from inside my apartment. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The crying was soft at first, hiccuping like a little kid sobbing. Then it grew louder. The weirdest part, it never moved. Normally, when you hear a sound in a house, it shifts slightly as it bounces off walls. But this crying was static, like a recording playing from a single fixed point. I checked my apartment, every room, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. My windows were closed, no TV was on, and my phone was on silent. Still, the crying persisted. The sound was coming from the corner of my bedroom near the closet. I stood there, feeling a chill creep up my spine. It was so clear now, ragged little sobs, almost pleading. I reached for my closet door, hands shaking, and yanked it open. Silence. The crying stopped instantly, like someone pressed pause. I barely slept that night, and by morning, I had convinced myself I was just overtired, hearing things. That is, until I ran into Mrs. Landry in the hall. She was staring at my door when I stepped out, her face pale. You heard it, didn't you? She asked. I stopped in my tracks. What? The crying, she whispered, wringing her hands. It's been happening for years. My stomach turned. What did it make years? Mrs. Landry hesitated, then sighed. Before you moved in, there was a family in that unit. A young mother and her little boy. The father was not kind. There were fights. The neighbors heard screaming sometimes. I swallowed hard. What happened? She gave me a sorrowful look. The boy disappeared. One night, his mother was found unconscious in the bathroom, an accidental overdose. The father moved out a week later. No one ever found the child. I felt sick. You think? I don't know what I think. She interrupted quickly, but ever since then, every new tenant hears it. The crying, always from the bedroom. I moved out a month later. Even after I moved out, I couldn't stop thinking about that apartment, the crying, the missing boy, the fact that no one ever seemed to last long in that unit. I told myself I was done with it, out of sight, out of mind. That was until 6 months later when I got another text. Dude, you need to hear this. Call me SOP. It was from my old neighbor, Mike, who lived on the floor above my old unit. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, but his message sent a wave of unease through me. When I called, he answered immediately. His voice was low, nervous. You remember that crying you used to hear? My blood ran cold. The new tenant, Anna, the one with the kid, she's freaking out. She called the landlord last night because she swore she saw something in her kid's room. He kept waking up screaming, saying there was a sad boy sitting at the end of his bed. I clenched the phone tighter. Jesus, what did she say? Mike hesitated. She said she woke up to her son crying. When she went in, she saw a shape in the dark, sitting at the foot of his bed. She flipped on the light, and it was gone. Just, God, I shuddered. She called the landlord. Yep, look at this. He wouldn't go in. He just stood at the door, listening, and said he'd send someone to check it out. Mike exhaled shakily. Dude, something's wrong with that apartment. I agreed, and, like an idiot, I decided I needed to see it one last time. The next day, I went back to the complex. I hadn't stepped foot there since I left, and the second I walked in, that heavy feeling settled in my chest again. I knocked on Anna's door. She answered quickly, looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Are you the guy who used to live here? She asked, barely giving me a chance to introduce myself. I nodded. She let me in without hesitation, almost desperate for someone to believe her. The apartment looked the same, except for one thing. Her son's bedroom door was shut and locked from the outside. He won't sleep in there anymore, she muttered. Every time he does, he wakes up screaming about the sad boy. And at night, I hear crying from the closet, just like a little kid sobbing. But when I open it, her voice faltered. Nothing, I finished. She looked at me sharply. You heard it too, didn't you? I nodded. Yeah. She swallowed. I need to show you something. She led me to the locked bedroom, took a deep breath, then unlocked the door. The room was small, just a bed and some toys scattered around. The closet door was open, and on the wall, just beside it, were crayon markers markings. I took a step closer. The handwriting was childish, smell, unsteady. Help me. My stomach twisted. Did your son write this? She shook her head. I asked him. He said the sad boy did it, but he doesn't know how to write yet. A chill ran through me. We stood there, staring at the wall, when suddenly a soft, hiccuping sob right behind us. Annie gasped and turned, eyes wide. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The closet. The crying was coming from the closet. I did what I should have never done. I reached out and yanked the door open. Nothing, but the crying didn't stop. It was right there, right in front of us, but there was no one there. Annie grabbed my arm. Get out, she whispered. Get out, now. We bolted. She moved out 2 days later. And now, the apartment is empty. The landlord stopped renting it. He won't say why, but last week, I drove past the complex. The lights in that unit were off. No one has lived there for months. I told myself I was done. That apartment, whatever was in there, wasn't my problem anymore. But some things don't let go that easily. A few nights after driving past the building, I woke up to a sound that shouldn't have been possible. A soft, hiccuping sob. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering. My apartment, my new apartment, across town, miles away from that cursed unit, was silent except for one thing. The crying. It was faint but unmistakable. A child's weeping inside my bedroom. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. It had to be coming from outside, maybe a neighbor, maybe the wind. But deep down, I knew it was him. I turned on every light in my apartment, searching for the source. The sound stayed in one place, the closet. I stood there, staring at the door, every muscle in my body screaming at me not to open it. But I did. Nothing. No clothes rustling, no shadows shifting. But as I stood there, staring into the empty space, the crying stopped. Then, for the first time ever, I heard something else. A whisper, faint, broken, like a child struggling to speak through tears. Please, help me. I slammed the closet shut. That night, I didn't sleep. I needed answers. Real ones. The next day, I went digging. I searched old newspapers, town records, anything I could find about the apartment complex. And I finally found it. 1975. A small article buried in the archives. A missing boy, Daniel Carter, age 6, disappeared from his home, apartment 2B. His mother found unresponsive in the bathroom the same night. His father never charged. And then I saw it. A grainy, black and white photo of a little boy with wide, sad eyes. I knew that face. I don't know how, but I did. I had seen him, and suddenly I understood. He wasn't haunting that apartment. He was trapped there. Maybe he never left. Maybe, after all those years of no one listening, he reached out to me because I had heard him. But I had left him behind. And now, he had followed me. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no experience with ghosts, spirits, whatever Daniel was. But I knew one thing. He didn't belong here. So I sat in my bedroom in the dark, and I spoke. Daniel, I said softly, I know what happened to you. Silence. I know you're scared, but you don't have to stay here anymore. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I'm sorry I left you behind. I should have helped. My voice shook, but you don't have to be alone anymore. For a long time, there was nothing, just the heavy, pressing stillness. Then, a breath, that mic, and then, so faint I almost didn't hear it. Thank you. And just like that, the room felt lighter. I never heard the crying again. I work at a small, family-owned motel off a highway in a pretty quiet area. We're not the kind of place where sketchy things happen, just your usual road trippers, families, and the occasional trucker. I usually work the night shift, which I actually enjoyed because it's peaceful. One night, around 2 a.m., a man walked in. He was tall, really tall, like 65 or more, and had this thin, stretched out look, like he had too much skin on too little muscle. He was wearing a brown jacket, jeans, and scuffed up boots. His face wasn't weird, exactly, but something about it didn't sit right. His features were misaligned, his nose slightly too far to one side, his eyes spaced just a little too wide apart. He didn't say anything when he approached the desk, just stood there, staring at me. Hey there, I said, trying to keep it casual, looking for a rib. He nodded, but it was a slow, deliberate nod, like he was trying to mimic how people move but hadn't quite figured it out. I tried to shake off the weird vibe and went through the usual check-in process. He paid in cash, took the key to room 8, and walked off without another word. A few minutes after he left, I checked the security camera. It's something I always do out of habit, just to see how guests behave, make sure no one's doing anything shady. But when I rewound the footage, there was no one there. The lobby camera showed me standing at the desk, talking and handing a key to no one. The doors opened, the key was taken, but there was no one visible on the screen. My stomach turned to ice. I quickly checked the hallway cam. Sure enough, the door to room 8 opened and then closed, all by itself. I don't scare easily, but I damn near quit on the spot. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Hi, I rented a room to an invisible man, so I did what any coward with rent to pay would do. I locked the office door and waited for my shift to end. Around 4 a.m., the phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Front desk, I said, my voice shaking. There was silence on the other end. Then a deep, raspy voice whispered, Valgrud. I slammed the phone down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. Minutes later, the door to room 8 opened again. I switched back to the camera feed. The door swung wide, and then it closed, like someone had just walked out. By the time morning rolled around, I was practically counting the seconds until my shift ended. My manager, Dave, came in at 7 a.m., and I immediately told him everything. He frowned and said, roommate. I nodded. We haven't rented that room in weeks. He pulled up the reservation log. My handwriting was there, the cash was in the drawer, but there was no name listed. Like I had checked someone in, but no one was ever there. We went to room 8 together, and when we opened the door, the bed was still made. The bathroom was untouched. The room looked exactly like it had before I gave him the key. The key. It was back on the hook behind the desk, like it had never left. I don't work there anymore. I don't know who or what I checked in that night, but sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about what would have happened if I had knocked on that door. I quit the motel job a few weeks later. Not right away. I convinced myself I had imagined it, that I was overtired, that maybe it was some kind of glitch with the cameras. But deep down, I knew that was bullshit. The last straw happened on my final shift. I had managed to avoid room 8 for weeks. I never booked anyone in there, never opened the door, never even looked in that direction if I could help it. But on my very last night, just after 2 a.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it, my hands gripping the desk so hard my knuckles went white. It was the motel's internal line. That meant the call was coming from inside one of the rooms. Slowly, I reached over and checked the caller ID. Roommate. I didn't pick up. It rang again, and again, and again. Each time, I let it go to voicemail, but when I checked the system, there were no new messages. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the ringing stopped. I held my breath, staring at the screen, willing it not to light up again. After what felt like forever, I forced myself to check the security cameras. Room 8's door was wide open. I hadn't seen it open, hadn't heard a single creak, but there it was, just gaping into the empty, dimly lit hallway. And then, click, the door slammed shut. That was it. I was done. I grabbed my stuff, left my keys on the desk, and walked out. I didn't even lock up. The manager called me the next day, pissed that I had bailed mid-shift. I told him exactly what had happened. He went quiet, and then, in a voice that sounded more tired than angry, he said, yeah, you're not the first. I asked him what the hell that meant, but he just sighed and told me he'd mail my last paycheck. A few months later, I ran into an old coworker at a gas station. She had stayed on at the motel after I left, and I hesitantly asked if anything weird had happened since I quit. She just stared at me for a second before finally saying, someone new rented room 8 last week, checked in fine, even came down for coffee in the morning, but when housekeeping went to clean the room, she swallowed hard. The bed was made, no luggage, no sign anyone had ever been in there. At that point, I wanted nothing to do with the motel. I put it behind me, or at least I tried, but things like that, they don't just leave you. For months, I had nightmares about room 8, dreams where I was back at the front desk, staring at the security monitors. The feed would flicker, and the door would be open again, always open. Sometimes, I could see a shape standing inside, too tall, too thin, stretched wrong, but I never saw its face. One night, the dream changed. Instead of being at the motel, I was in my own apartment, lying in bed. The air felt heavy, thick, like something was pressing down on me. Then I heard it. Click, a door closing. My eyes shot open. My bedroom door was shut. I never shut my bedroom door. I sat up, heart pounding, reaching for my phone. That's when I noticed my closet door was open, just slightly. The crack. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at that darkness. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, waiting, listening, and then, just like in my dream, I saw it. A shape, a shadow, too tall, too thin, standing just inside my closet. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember running to my car. All I know is I spent the night in a 24-hour diner, surrounded by people and bright fluorescent lights, waiting for sunrise. When I finally forced myself to go home the next morning, the closet door was closed. My bedroom door was open again. Nothing looked out of place, but the air in my apartment felt rugged, like something had been there, like something had been watching me. That was 3 months ago. I don't sleep with my closet door open anymore. I don't let my bedroom door close either. I was on a solo trip to Colorado, spending a few days in a cabin I had rented through Airbnb. It was one of those scenic, secluded places, perfect for unwinding, hiking, and just getting away from everything. The cabin was small but cozy, perched near the edge of a forest with a breathtaking view of the mountains. The first 2 days were uneventful. I spent most of my time reading, taking long walks, and snapping photos of the landscape. At night, the woods were eerily silent, but I chalked it up to be far from civilization. The weirdness started on the third night. I had been reviewing the photos on my camera, deleting the bad ones and keeping the good ones, when I noticed something off in one of them. It was a picture I had taken earlier that day, a selfie in front of a scenic overlook. In the background, barely visible among the trees, was a man. He was just standing there. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, but something about him unnerved me. He was too still, almost posed, and I didn't remember seeing anyone around when I took that photo. I zoomed in. He was wearing dark clothes and had an unnaturally wide grin. His eyes, even with the blurriness, seemed to be staring directly at me. The chill ran down my spine. I scrolled through my other pictures, and my stomach dropped. He was in more than one, always distant, always half hidden by trees or shadows. I hadn't noticed him when I was actually there, but in the photos, he was watching. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just another hiker. Maybe I hadn't been paying attention. But why was he in so many of my shots? And why hadn't I ever seen him? Uneasy, I locked the doors and made sure all the windows were shut before going to bed. I barely slept. Every little noise outside made my heart pound. The next morning, I decided to leave early. As I packed up my things, I flipped through my camera one last time. The photos were different. The ones with the man in it wasn't like I had deleted them. I checked my recently deleted folder and they weren't there either. It was like they had never existed. But I knew what I saw. I left that cabin in record time, my bags barely packed, and drove straight into town. The whole way down that winding mountain road, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting in my backseat. Every shadow, every movement in the trees sent my heart racing. By the time I reached the first gas station, I was shaking so bad I could barely fill my tank. I went inside to grab a coffee and pull myself together. The cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed I was jittery. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, giving me a once-over. I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy, but something in her tone told me she might actually listen. So I told her a short, edited version of what happened, how I had seen a man in my photos, how he wasn't there when I took them, and how they disappeared overnight. I expected her to laugh or wave me off. Instead, she got quiet, too quiet. She glanced toward the window, like she was making sure no one was outside, then leaned in. "You were up at Larkspur Ridge, weren't you?" My stomach dropped. "Yep." "Why?" She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "People see things up there. Not often, but when they do." She trailed off, as if debating whether to tell me more. "What do they say?" I pressed. Her gaze met mine, and something about her expression sent a fresh wave of chills over me. A man in the trees. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "They say he only shows up in pictures. Not to your eyes, not to your ears. Only in photos. And if you see him, you don't stay another night." I swallowed hard. Thought my pictures, he was there, and then they were gone. She nodded, like she already knew. "That's how it works." I felt sick. I wanted to ask more, who he was, what he was, why the hell this wasn't something people warned travelers about. But I couldn't. My body had already decided it was time to leave. The cashier must have seen it on my face because she didn't stop me when I grabbed my coffee and bolted. I drove straight home. Didn't stop. Didn't look at my camera again for days. When I finally worked up the courage, every single photo from that trip was still there, except for the ones where he had been. Those were just the same, like they had never existed. I've never gone back to Colorado. Never booked another secluded cabin. But sometimes, when I take photos, random ones in random places, I catch myself scanning the background, because deep down, I have this gut-wrenching feeling. After that trip, I tried to move on. Really, I did. I went back to my normal routine, told myself it was just some weird glitch with my camera, or maybe I had been overtired and imagining things. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started small. Random glitches on my phone whenever I took pictures, corrupted files, missing photos, strange distortions. Once, I took a selfie in my apartment, and when I looked at it later, the entire background was wrong. Like my furniture had been rearranged, like my reflection in the mirror was facing the wrong way. Then, the dreams began. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my mind filled with flashes of deep, endless woods. A figure standing just out of reach, his grin too wide, his eyes locked onto mine. He never moved, never spoke, just watched. I could feel him, like he was studying me. The worst part, every time I woke up, my phone would be on my nightstand with the camera open, as if I had taken a photo in my sleep. but there was never a new picture. Then, one night, something happened that made me consider leaving town altogether. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I had fallen asleep with the TV on, trying to drown out my thoughts. A snap sound woke me, quiet, but distinct, like the artificial shutter noise a phone camera makes. I froze. The room was dark except for the glow of the television. My phone was sitting on my dresser across the room, face down, but the screen was still on, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw what was displayed. The camera was open, and there was a freshly taken photo on the screen. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It was a picture of me, asleep in bed, but I hadn't taken it, and I was alone. I felt my stomach twist. Every part of me screamed to leave the apartment, to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. Then I noticed the background. In the reflection of my bedroom window, just barely visible in the darkness, there was a figure standing behind the glass. Grinning, the phone slipped from my hands. I spun toward the window, my breath caught in my throat, but there was nothing there, just the night sky, empty streets, and my own terrified reflection. I left that night, grabbed my keys, my wallet, and drove straight to a friend's place without looking back. The next morning, I checked my phone again. The photo was gone, like it had never been taken. At the time, I was working the overnight shift as a hotel receptionist at a mid-tier chain hotel off the highway. It wasn't one of those high-crime sketchy places, but we definitely had our fair share of odd guests and weird encounters. I was the only staff on duty from midnight to 7 a.m., which was standard. My job was mostly checking in late arrivals, handling wake-up calls, and making sure the lobby stayed quiet. I also had to answer the phone for any guests who needed assistance. One night, around 3 a.m., the phone rang. The screen showed it was coming from a room inside the hotel, room 308. That wasn't strange in itself. Guests called the front desk all the time for things like extra towels or to complain about noise. But as I picked up the phone and greeted the caller, I was met with total silence. Hello, I tried again. Still nothing, just faint static, like an old radio barely picking up a signal. I assumed it was a bad connection, so I hung up. A minute later, the phone rang again, room 308. I sighed and answered, front desk, how can I help? Again, no response. This time, however, I heard something in the static. It was soft, but distinct. A whisper, not words, just the sound of breath close to the receiver. I shivered. Hello, can you call me? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. The whispering stopped. Then, after a long, eerie pause, the call disconnected. I felt uneasy, but figured it was some drunk guest messing with me. Still, I checked the computer to see who was staying in 308. Nobody. The room was vacant. Had been for 3 nights. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a glitch. Maybe someone was in the room when they weren't supposed to be. I had to check. I grabbed the master key and made my way up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet, the air slightly stale like nobody had walked through in hours. I reached room 308 and hesitated before knocking. Hotel staff, I called in, is anyone in here? No response. I slid the key card in and pushed the door open. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the street light filtering through the curtains. I stepped inside cautiously. The bed was made. The bathroom door was open, the towels neatly folded. The TV remote was on the nightstand, untouched. Everything looked completely normal, but the air in there, it felt wrong, thick, heavy, like I had stepped into a place I wasn't supposed to be. Then, as I turned back toward the door, the phone on the nightstand rang, loud and shrill in the silent room. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Slowly, I walked over and picked it up with a shaking hand. I didn't know if it'd say anything. I just listened. At first, nothing. Then, the whispering started again, soft, breathy, right into my ear. And this time, I heard something else beneath it, something faintly wet, like lips smacking together in slow, deliberate movements. I slammed the phone down and bolted out of the room. I didn't check the call logs again. I didn't go back to 308. I just sat at the front desk, staring at the security feed, waiting for something to move on the 3rd floor, but nothing ever did. I told my manager the next morning. He frowned but didn't look surprised. We don't assign guests to that room anymore, he admitted after a pause. You're not the first to get those calls. I asked what he meant. He hesitated before shrugging. 308 seconds had issues. That's all he said. I quit 2 weeks later. I told myself I was done with that job, done with room 308, done with thinking about that whispering voice. But some things don't let you go so easily. A few months after I quit, I got a message from a former coworker, Maria, who still worked at the hotel. Maria, hey, were you working the night we had that power outage? What power outage? Maria, a couple weeks before you left, the cameras went black for like 20 minutes. I was just wondering if you ever saw anything weird before that. That sent a chill down my spine. I didn't remember a power outage at least not a real one, but I did remember a night when the security feed glitched. It happened about a week after the call from 308. The screens flickered, turned to static, they went dark. I had assumed it was a system error. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. What happened? Maria took a while to respond. Then, Maria, I don't know if I want to tell you. You already got freaked out by that room. That was true, but at this point, I needed to know. Lee, just tell me. She finally replied. Maria, a guest came down to the front desk that night, said they saw someone standing in the hallway outside their room. My stomach nodded. Lee, which room? Maria, 309, right next to 308. I didn't reply. She kept going. Maria, they said it was a man, just standing there, facing the door. Thought maybe he was lost or drunk, but then they noticed something weird. What? Maria, his mouth was moving. Maria, like he was whispering to himself. A cold, crawling sensation crept up my neck. Maria, the guest opened the door to ask if he needed help, but when they did, Maria, there was no one there. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Maria's last message came through a few minutes later. Maria, you still there? I was, but I had no idea what to say. After Maria's message, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that night over and over in my head. The phone call, the whispering, the wet sound, and now this man outside room 309. I didn't want to believe it was real. Maybe the guest had been half asleep. Maybe they imagined it. Maybe Maria was just messing with me. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I did something I shouldn't have done. I went back to the hotel. Maria was surprised to see me. What the hell are you doing here? I forced a laugh. Curiosity got the best of me. She gave me a look, like she wanted to tell me to drop it but knew I wouldn't. Look, I get it, she said, but you quit for a reason. And honestly, you were right to. I wasn't backing out now. Just tell me. I pressed. That night, the one with the guy outside 309. What happened after that? She hesitated. Then, finally, she sighed. The guest called the front desk. She said they were freaked out, so I sent up security, and they didn't find anyone. But she trailed off. The what? Maria lowered her voice. The guest said they saw something right before security got there. I swallowed hard. What? She glanced around the empty lobby, then leaned in. The man wasn't just whispering, she murmured. He was moving his lips like he was speaking, but no sound came out. I nodded slowly. Yep, you said that. She shook her head. No, I beat it. She took a breath. They did hear something, but it didn't come from him. My stomach turned. What do you mean? Maria met my eyes. The voice, she said, was coming from inside 308. I left after that. I told myself I was done for real this time. I tried to forget. I really did. But a few nights later, I woke up to something that made my blood run cold. My phone, it was 3 a.m. I didn't recognize the number, and something deep inside me whispered, don't answer. I almost did it, but after the third ring, my thumb moved on its own. I picked up. Silence. I sat up. Heart pounding. Hello. I croaked. It paused. Then the whispering started. Soft, breathy, just like before. My entire body went cold. I yanked the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen. The call was still connected. The whispering still right there in the speaker. I pressed end call. It didn't hang up. The whispering continued, and then I heard something else. A wet, smacking sound, like lips pulling apart over and over. I threw my phone across the room. When I picked it up a minute later, the call was gone. There was no missed call, no record of it ever happening. I was renting a small one-bedroom apartment in an old building just off campus. The building had this eerie vibe, not necessarily haunted, just, it was a U-shaped complex with a courtyard in the middle, and my unit was at the farthest end of one of the wings, next to a locked storage room that the landlord never opened. The room always made me uneasy. Something about it just felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the light in the hall always seemed dimmer near the door, or how it was ice cold whenever I walked past, even in the middle of summer. My neighbors joked that something was probably dead in there. One night, I was up late studying when I heard something from the hallway. It was faint at first, like a scratching noise, but then it turned into a slow, rhythmic knocking on the storage room door. I froze. It was almost 2 a.m., and as far as I knew, no one had access to that room. The knocking continued. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I crept to my door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the knocking was still going, clear as day. It was coming from inside the locked storage room. I backed away from the door, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was pipes, was an animal trapped inside, but then, click, the sound of the storage room's doorknob turning. I swear, my blood turned to ice. It rattled once, twice, like someone on the other side was trying to open it. My apartment door was locked, but I still instinctively stepped back as far as I could, barely even breathing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. The knob waited still. The hallway outside was silent again. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went to class and tried to brush it off, but when I got home that afternoon, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The storage room door was open, not all the way, just an inch or two, like someone had finally managed to get it unlocked but hadn't come out yet. The darkness beyond the crack seemed impossibly deep, like the room stretched farther than it should. I stood there, debating whether to report it to the landlord or just pretend I hadn't seen it. But as I stared, the door moved, just a tiny shift, like something inside had noticed me. I turned and walked straight to my car. I didn't even pack my things. I drove to a friend's place and crashed on their couch, shaking. The next day, I broke my lease. I never went back to that apartment. I don't know what was in that storage room. I don't want to know, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that knocking in my dreams. I tried to put it all behind me. I really did. After I left, I found a new place across town. Nothing fancy, just a tiny studio, but it was bright and normal. No weird vibes. No doors that shouldn't be open. For a while, I thought I was free of whatever had happened in that apartment, but then things started creeping back in. It was little things at first. I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all, my body heavy with exhaustion. A few times, I caught myself standing in front of my closet door, just staring at it in the middle of the night, my mind blank. I told myself it was stress, trauma, maybe. That's what my friends said. You freaked yourself out. They told me it was just an old building with bad wiring and weird sounds. Move on. But how do you move on when the knocking follows you? It started about a month after I left. 3 knocks, pose, 3 more. At first, I thought it was my upstairs neighbor, or maybe the plumbing again, but deep down, I knew it was the exact same rhythm, the same deliberate, patient sound, the same message. I tried ignoring it. I turned up my TV. I played music when I went to sleep, but it didn't stop. And then, one night, I woke up to something worse. I was lying in bed, facing the wall, when I felt the mattress shift behind me like someone had just sat down. My body went stiff. I held my breath, my mind screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. And then a slow, draggy knock against the wood of my headboard. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I finally turned over, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. After that, I started noticing other things. My closet door was always slightly open, even when I swore I had closed it. Shadows that didn't belong flickered at the edges of my vision. Sometimes, when I walked past a mirror, I thought I saw something standing just behind me, something too tall, too thin, its head tilted slightly as if listening. The last straw came 2 weeks ago. I was in my kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the knocking again. But this time, it wasn't from the wall. It was coming from inside my closet. I didn't move. I just stood there, my breath shallow, waiting. And then, from the other side of the door, a voice. Low, whispering, amused. You left the door open. I ran. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, just that I was in my car before I fully understood what had happened. I drove to my sister's house and told her everything. I haven't been back to my apartment since. She thinks I should see someone, but how do you explain this to a therapist? Hey, there's something knocking on my walls, and I think it followed me from a locked room in my old building. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it wants. All I know is that I can still hear it, even here. I don't know how much longer I can ignore this. After that night at my sister's, I decided I wasn't going back to my apartment. Ever. I crashed on her couch for a few days, trying to convince myself I was just paranoid, that the stress of everything was messing with my head. But then my sister heard it too. It was late, probably close to 3 a.m. I was lying awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I froze. It was coming from inside the house. Then I heard my sister's voice from her room, groggy and irritated. Hello. She thought someone was at the front door. I knew better. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway just as she was stepping out of her room, her phone in her hand. Did you hear that? She asked. I nodded. She frowned, rubbing her eyes. It came from downstairs, right? I didn't want to answer, because I already knew where it had come from. Not downstairs, not the front door, from inside the hall closet, right between our bedrooms. As soon as I realized that, the knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. My sister's face went pale. There's no way someone's in there, she whispered, glancing at me like she wanted me to confirm it. I couldn't. The door was just a few feet away. It was closed, but I swear I could feel something on the other side. Waited. She took a shaky step forward. I'm opening it. No. I grabbed your arm. Don't. She yacked away. What do you mean, don't? If someone's in there, we call the cops. But we both knew there was no one to call the cops on. Still, she reached out, hand hovering over the doorknob. The second her fingers touched the metal, the knocking stopped. Dead silence. And then something breathed. A long, rattling inhale coming from behind the door. My sister screamed and bolted into her room, slamming the door behind her. I wasn't far behind, locking myself in the guest room and pressing my back against the door like that would somehow keep it out. I don't remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, it was morning. The house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the window like nothing had happened. But when I finally got the courage to open the door, my stomach dropped. The hall closet door was wide open. My sister moved out that afternoon. She booked a hotel for the rest of the month and told her landlord she wasn't coming back. I don't blame her. As for me, I'm staying with a friend now, but I know that's not going to help. No matter where I go, it follows me. And last night, when I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again. 3 knocks. Well, it's 3 more. But this time, there was no door. It was coming from inside my pillow. And when I turned over, something whispered in my ear. I found you. I used to live in a high-rise apartment complex in Chicago. It wasn't a bad building, but it had that typical eerie feel most old buildings have. Dim hallways, weirdly quiet at night, the occasional flickering light, but nothing too unusual. One evening, I was coming back from work, exhausted and carrying takeout. The elevator was just about to close when a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, darted in at the last second. He was wearing a striped shirt and khaki shorts, and he wasn't carrying anything, no backpack, no toys, nothing. Just standing there with his hands at his sides. I pressed my floor button and waited for him to press his. He didn't. You forgot to press your floor, I said, trying to be friendly. He just looked up at me. His eyes were strange, not black or anything like those horror stories, but they didn't seem to focus on me, like he was looking through me. I pressed the door close button, assuming maybe he lived on my floor. The ride up was quiet, too quiet. I could hear my own breathing and the soft hum of the elevator, but nothing from him. He just stood there, stiff, staring ahead. When we got to my floor, I stepped out first. He followed. At this point, I figured he was a neighbor's kid. Maybe he forgot his key or something, but as I walked toward my door, I hesitated. He wasn't going to any of the other apartments. He was following me. I turned it up. Where are you going? He blinked. Home. That made me pause. Where's home? He pointed directly at my apartment. I actually laughed, assuming he was confused. This is my place. He just nodded, as if he already knew that. I was starting to get that cold, creeping sensation in my spine, the kind that tells you something isn't right. Where do your parents live? I asked, feeling a little nervous now. The boy tilted his head slightly, then said, here. I knew for a fact that wasn't true. I had lived in that unit for almost 4 years. No kids had ever lived there before me. At this point, I was done with whatever weird game this was. I turned, unlocked my door, and slipped inside fast, shutting it behind me. I locked it and took a deep breath, trying to shake the unease. Then, I nearly dropped my takeout. The boy was knocking at my door. I stayed silent, hoping he'd leave, but he didn't. That loud, just persistent. I looked through the peephole. He was still there, staring at the door like he was waiting. I didn't open it. I don't know why, but every instinct screamed at me not to. After a minute, the knocking stopped. I waited, heart pounding. Then I checked the peephole again. He was gone. I waited a full 5 minutes before cracking the door open and looking down the hallway. No sign of him. The elevator wasn't moving. I even checked the stairwell. Nothing. I don't know who that kid was. I never saw him again after that night. A few nights passed without incident, but the eerie feeling never quite left me. Every time I stepped into the elevator alone, I expected to turn and see that kid standing there, staring, but he never showed up again. At least, not in the way I expected. One night, maybe a week later, I was up late watching TV when I got this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. It was a weird, crawling feeling, like being watched, but heavier. I booted the TV. My apartment was dead silent. Then, in the quiet, I heard it. A soft knock. It wasn't coming from my front door. It was coming from inside my apartment. I froze. It was faint, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Knock. My throat went dry. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway, maybe the closet. No, closer. Then I realized. The coat closet by the front door. I sat there, frozen, listening. Nothing. No movement. No footsteps. Just that awful, pressing silence. I had to force myself to stand. Every step toward the closet felt like I was wading through molasses. My hands were slick with sweat as I reached reached for the doorknob. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I yanked it open. Nothing, just my coat, my shoes, the same as always. But something was off. The air inside the closet was ice cold, like stepping into a freezer. I stared at the space for a long moment, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, slowly, I closed the door. I locked it. I didn't know why, but I had to. I barely slept that night. After that, weird things kept happening. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find my front door unlocked, even though I knew I had locked it. Once, I came home to find the coat closet wide open, which made no sense since I always kept it shut. The worst part, the feeling in the elevator got stronger. Every night, coming home, I'd step inside and feel like I wasn't alone, like something was standing just behind me, watching. I stopped looking in the reflective metal walls, afraid I'd see something I didn't want to see. Then came the final night. I was exhausted, working late. The building was quiet as I stepped into the elevator. I pressed my floor button and leaned against the back wall, rubbing my eyes. I wasn't looking at the doors when they slid shut, but I felt it. Movement, something shifting in the reflection. Slowly, I lifted my head. In the dull, distorted metal of the doors, I saw it. A shape standing behind me. Still, the child. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. The elevator was empty, but I swear, for just a split second before I turned, I saw his face in the reflection. His mouth was open, but not like a smile, more like he was screaming, except there was no sound. The doors opened to my floor. I bolted out and never looked back. That was the last time I ever took that elevator. I started using the stairs, even if it meant hiking up 10 flights. The weird feeling never went away, but I never saw the boy again. I moved out 6 months later. I moved into a new apartment across town, a much newer building with better lighting, no weird drafts, and, most importantly, no unsettling vibes. For a while, I convinced myself that whatever had happened in my old place was just my imagination. Stress, overworked, lack of sleep. I almost believed it, until the knocking started again. It was about 3 months after I moved. I had completely settled in, new furniture, new job, new routine. Life was good. I barely thought about the boy anymore. Then, one night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. Nelk, soft, rhythmic, coming from my hallway closet. I froze. Not again. I turned off the sink and listened. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The apartment was silent. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe. Nelk. My stomach turned to ice. It was real. It was happening again. I stood there, toothbrush still in my hand, debating what to do. Every part of me was screaming to ignore it, pretend I didn't hear it, go to bed and never open that door. But I had to. I moved slowly, step by step, toward the closet. My whole body felt wrong, like something inside me was pulling backward, resisting. I reached for the handle. My fingers were ice cold. I yanked the door open. Nothing, just coats, shoes, the vacuum cleaner. The air inside wasn't cold this time, but the smell, it smelled like the old building, dusty, a little damp, like aged concrete, like the elevator. I backed away, slammed the door shut, and locked it. That night, I barely slept. I kept expecting to hear more knocks, a voice, footsteps. Nothing came. For weeks after, I avoided the closet. I even started keeping my shoes by the front door so I wouldn't have to open it. I refused to let myself think about it. Then, one night, something new happened. I was sitting on my couch, watching TV, when I heard a sound. Not knocking this time, the sound of an elevator dinging. I don't have an elevator in my building. I booted the TV. My blood turned to ice. Then, faint, this time, coming from inside my apartment. Then, in the silence that followed, I heard the softest whisper, a child's voice. I ran. I didn't even grab my keys. I just ran out the door, down the stairs, and out into the street. I stood there in my socks, gasping for breath, staring up at my own apartment window. Nothing. I stayed at a friend's place that night. The next day, I broke my lease. I don't know how, but I think whatever that thing was, it followed me, and I don't think it was ever a little boy. I moved across the state after that. Lose today, do everything. So far, nothing weird has happened. No knocking, no cold closets, no phantom elevator sounds, but sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I get this feeling, like if I turn around too fast, I'll see something small standing just behind me. This happened to me a few years ago when I was living in a rural town in the Midwest. I was on my way home from a late shift at the diner I worked at, exhausted and looking forward to getting into bed. My drive was a lonely one, about 25 miles of empty road with nothing but fields on either side. I was used to it, though, nothing but cows, an occasional deer, and the sound of my tires against the pavement. That night, about halfway through my drive, I saw something up ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. My headlights caught the bright orange vest he was wearing, the kind construction workers or road cruises. It was strange. There was no road work happening on that stretch of highway, not at that hour. I slowed down, not wanting to hit him. As I got closer, I could see he was an older man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with a weathered face and a thick, graying beard. He had one hand raised like he was signaling me to stop. I rolled my window down just a crack. Maybe he was trying to... "Everything okay, sir?" I asked, keeping my foot hovering over the brake. He leaned slightly toward my window, but I couldn't see his eyes under the brim of his cap. His voice was calm, but something about it felt off. "Road's out up ahead. You need to turn back." That sent a small chill up my spine. The road definitely wasn't out. I'd driven this way to work just fine, and there hadn't been any storms or construction notices. "Oh, are you sure?" I asked. "Yep," he nodded, stepping closer. "You better turn around now." Every instinct in me screamed that something wasn't right. Instead of stopping completely, I let my foot off the brake and started rolling forward slowly. His hand shot out and grabbed my door handle. "Turn around," he said again, firmer this time, and I panicked. I hit the gas and swerved around him, my tires skidding as I got past. I checked my rearview mirror. He was just standing there, watching me drive away. I didn't stop until I was a few miles down the road. My heart was hammering in my chest. Eventually, my nerves settled, and I convinced myself that maybe he was just some concerned old guy trying to warn me about something. But then, about 5 minutes later, I passed another figure on the side of the road. Another man in an orange vest. This one was younger, maybe in his 30s, clean shaven. He was just standing at the edge of the road, facing the fields, not signaling, not moving. And when my headlights hit him, I swear to God, he turned and smiled. I floored it the rest of the way home, locked every door, and barely slept that night. A few weeks passed, and I did everything I could to push that night out of my mind. I told a couple of coworkers about it, half expecting them to laugh it off, but their reactions only unsettled me more. "You saw them," one of them said, eyes wide. "The best guys," another muttered, shaking his head. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to see strange men in orange vests on that road. A few people had mentioned them before, always appearing at night, always standing in the middle of the road or just off to the side, watching. Some had been told to turn back, just like I had. Others swore they saw them standing in the fields, completely still, facing the road like they were waiting for something. A trucker who came through town often said he nearly hit one of them once, but when he got out of his rig to check, there was no one there. Another driver claimed he turned around like the man told him to, only to find himself driving in circles for hours until the sun started to rise. But the worst story, a girl who used to work at the diner before me disappeared on that road a couple of years back. She was supposed to make it home after her shift, but she never did. Her car was found abandoned in a ditch a few miles out, the driver's side door open, key still in the ignition. No sign of a struggle, no sign of her. The only thing out of place, a dirty, crumpled orange vest lying a few feet away in the grass. Hearing all of this made my stomach churn. I hadn't imagined it. Those men, whatever they were real, and I had been so close to stopping for them. From then on, I refused to drive that road alone at night. If I had a late shift, I either convinced someone to drive home with me or took the longer route, no matter how much gas it burned. It wasn't worth the risk. And then, one night, my roommate, Lisa, decided she didn't believe me. I had just gotten home from work when she smirked and said, "So, I took your scary vest road tonight. Guess what? Nothing happened." I froze. "Lisa, why would you do that?" She rolled her eyes. "Because you're freaking out over some dumb ghost story." I figured I'd prove there's nothing out there, but then her expression faltered. "Okay," she admitted, "I did see something weird." I felt my stomach drop. There was this guy standing way out in the field, like way too far out for it to make sense. He was just standing there, wearing one of those vests, not moving. I only saw him because my headlights hit him at the right angle. I swallowed hard, and she hesitated. When I looked in my rearview mirror, I swear I saw another one on the side of the road, but I didn't see him when I passed. I stared at her. Did he smile? Her face went pale. "You saw that too." That was the last time either of us drove that road at night. We moved out of that town a year later, but sometimes I still dream about the men in the orange vests. I see them standing in the road, in the fields, by the trees. A year passed. Lisa and I had moved to a bigger city, far away from that empty stretch of road and the strange men in orange vests. I should have felt safe. I should have been able to forget, but I couldn't. The dreams kept coming. At first, they were infrequent, once every few months, then maybe once a month. But then they became weekly, and recently, almost every night. It was always the same. I was back on that lonely road. The sky was dark, but the moon was too bright, illuminating everything in that eerie silver glow. The field stretched endlessly on either side, and the road seemed longer than I remembered. And then I would see them. At first, just one, a familiar figure in an orange vest standing in the center of the road, arm raised as if signaling me to stop. His beard was thick, his face weathered, the same man from that night. But no matter how I tried to steer away, I couldn't. My hands weren't my own. The car kept driving forward, slower and slower, as if being pulled. Then, out of the corners of my eyes, I would start to see more of them. They'd appear on the sides of the road, standing in the tall grass, half hidden behind fence posts or utility poles. Some stood farther out in the fields, barely visible, but I knew they were watching. And then, just like before, one of them would smile. That's when I would wake up. Lisa knew I was having trouble sleeping, but I didn't tell her about the dreams. I didn't want to bring it up again. Didn't want to risk dragging us back into something we had barely escaped from. But then, 2 nights ago, something happened that I can't explain. I was coming home late, nothing unusual, just a long shift at my new job. The city was different. No endless stretches of empty road, no open fields, just street lights, cars, people. It should have made me feel safe. But as I pulled into my apartment complex's parking lot, my headlights flashed across something that made my stomach drop. A man standing just beyond the entrance, wearing an orange vest. He wasn't blocking the road this time, and he wasn't motioning for me to stop. He was just standing there, near the sidewalk, partially illuminated by the glow of a flickering street lamp. He didn't move. He didn't wave, but I knew he was there for me. I threw my car into park and sprinted inside, locking the door behind me. I pressed my back against it, trying to steady my breathing, heart pounding so hard it hurt. After a few minutes, I convinced myself to look out the peephole. The parking lot was empty. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I had the dream again. But this time, it was different. I wasn't on the empty road. I was in my apartment. The layout was exactly the same, down to the flickering kitchen light we kept forgetting to fix. I was standing by my bed, staring at my front door, and there was a shadow under it, a pair of feet. Something was standing right outside. Then, slowly, the door handle began to turn. I jolted awake, gasping, covered in sweat. It was still dark outside. My bedroom was quiet, but then tap, 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 a knock at the door. Soft, deliberate. I stayed frozen in bed, clutching my blanket, heart hammering in my chest. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. My first instinct was to call Lisa, but she wasn't home. She had gone to visit her parents for the weekend. I knew I had to check. I had to see. Slowly, I crept toward the door, careful to stay silent. The peephole felt like the only barrier between me and whatever was out there. I closed one eye, leaned in, and looked. The hallway was empty. Nothing. No one. But just as I let out a shaky breath, I noticed something at the bottom of the door. A piece of fabric, bright orange. This happened about 2 years ago when I was still living alone in my first apartment. It wasn't in the best part of town, but it was cheap, and at the time, that was all that mattered. One night, around 9:30 p.m., I was winding down from work, watching TV with a glass of wine, when there was a knock at my door. That was weird. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived in a small apartment complex with an outer security door that led to a hallway, and you needed a key or for someone to buzz you in. My friends knew to text first before coming over, and I hadn't ordered any food. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I went to the peephole and looked out. A delivery guy stood there, holding a white plastic bag. He wore a red hoodie with the hood up and a baseball cap under it, the brim pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, just his mouth and the scruff on his chin. Still weird. I hadn't ordered anything. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out, "I think you have the wrong apartment." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, gripping the plastic bag like he was thinking. Then, finally, he muttered, "Order 4. Thribe." That was my apartment number. My stomach twisted. I hadn't ordered anything. "Who's it from?" I asked. He mumbled something, but it was too quiet to hear. "Sorry," I said, louder this time. "I didn't order anything." Another long pause. Then, in the same low voice, he said, "It's already paid for. Just take it." A weird, sinking feeling settled in my gut. I don't want it. Silence. He just stood there, not leaving, not saying anything else. Something in me knew that I should not open that door. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the door as I grabbed my phone. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but something about this whole thing felt wrong. When I looked back through the peephole, he was still there, but now he was leaning forward, too close to the door, like he was listening. That's when my fight or flight instincts kicked in. I called my building manager, who lived on site, and told him some guy was trying to deliver food I hadn't ordered and wouldn't leave. He said he'd come check. The moment I hung up, the guy outside knocked again, this time harder. I didn't answer, just backed away further, pressing myself against the opposite wall. About a minute later, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the hall. My building manager. When I looked through the peephole again, the delivery guy was gone. Just the building manager knocked and called my name. When I opened the door, he looked down the hall, then back at me. No one was here, he said. I told him what happened, and he frowned. No delivery guys are supposed to be in here without being let in. How'd he get past the front door? I had no idea. We checked the security footage the next day. That's when things got even worse. The cameras showed the man in the red hoodie entering the building, but not through the front. He had come from inside, through the back entrance that was supposed to be locked at all times. He walked straight to my door, stood there for a few seconds, then knocked. Then, after I refused to open up, he lingered outside for almost 10 minutes, not knocking, not moving, just standing there, facing my door. And then, he slowly set the plastic bag down, took something out of his hoodie pocket, and pressed it against my door handle. We zoomed in. It was a paper towel. He was wiping down the doorknob. Then he picked up the bag again and walked back the way he came. He never left through the front door. To this day, I'd have no idea what was in that bag, or how he got inside. After seeing the security footage, I felt like I was going to be sick. My building manager, Dave, rewound the footage again, shaking his head. This door is supposed to be locked at all times, he muttered, pausing on the frame where the man in the red hoodie disappeared down the back hallway. The problem was, that back entrance, it only led to one place, the maintenance stairwell. It wasn't an exit, it just led to the basement, where the laundry room and storage units were. There was no way out from there unless you had a key to the private maintenance door. So where the hell did he go? Dave must have been thinking the same thing because he grabbed his Kyrian and said, "Come on, let's check downstairs." Every instinct in me screamed, bad idea, but I didn't want to be alone, so I followed him in. The basement was dimly lit, the air thick with that stale, slightly damp smell old buildings always had. The laundry room was empty, no strange men, no discarded delivery bags. Then we checked the storage units. They were small chain link cages where tenants could keep extra stuff. Most were padlocked, most. One near the back was slightly open. Dave and I exchanged a glance before he pulled the door open the rest of the way. The unit was practically empty except for a couple of cardboard boxes pushed against the wall, and on top of one of them, a red hoodie, neatly folded. I stepped back, heart racing, but Dave moved forward, flipping open the top box. His face immediately darkened. What the hell? Inside was a pile of random objects, bouquets, a couple of wallets, a set of women's sunglasses, and a stack of photos. Dave picked one up, his fingers tightening around it. It was a picture of a woman, one of our neighbors from the second floor, and under it another, and another. Different women, different angles, some from inside the building, others from outside, like they had been taken through a window. And then Dave flipped to the last one. My stomach dropped. It was May, a photo of me walking into my apartment, taken from behind. My legs nearly gave out. I had to grip the edge of the storage cage to steady myself. Dave swore under his breath and immediately called the cops. They took everything, every photo, every wallet, even the damn hoodie. They checked security footage again, searched the entire building, questioned tenants, but the man in the red hoodie, they never found him. No one knew who he was, how long he had been sneaking around, or if he had a key. And the worst part, the plastic bag he had left outside my door, it was never found. The cops suspected he took it with him after wiping down my doorknob, but something about that didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking, what if it wasn't food? What if it was something else? Something he wanted me to bring inside, to touch, something meant to make me sick or knock me out. I moved out a month later. I couldn't stay there, not after knowing some stranger had been watching me, collecting things, taking pictures. For a while, I tried to put it behind me. I moved to a new apartment across town, somewhere with better security, key fob entry, cameras at every entrance, even a front desk attendant. I told myself it was over, that he was gone, but deep down, I never really believed that. The paranoia stuck with me. Every time I walked into my new building, I felt eyes on me. I triple-checked my locks before bed. I stopped using the laundry room late at night, too nervous to be alone in a quiet, enclosed space. And then, 6 months later, it happened again. It was a Sunday night. I had just gotten home from a weekend trip visiting my sister in another city. My suitcase was still by the door, and I was in the middle of sorting through my mail when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Missed you this weekend. Glad you're home safe. My stomach dropped. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much. I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself it was just a wrong number, but I knew better. Whoever sent that text knew I had been gone, and they knew I had just come back. I forced myself to breathe. My mind raced. I had barely been home for 15 minutes. How did they know? Were they watching the entrance? The parking garage? Had they been inside my building? My new apartment was supposed to be safe, but the fear, the knowing, came rushing back. I called the front desk immediately. The attendant, Jacob, was a nice guy, always chatty. When I told him what happened, he got serious real fast. Come downstairs, he said. I grabbed my keys and took the elevator down. When I reached the front desk, Jacob was already pulling up the security footage. We log every person who comes in, he said. If someone's watching you, we'll find them. I stood behind him, my arms wrapped around myself, watching as he scrolled through the footage from the past few hours. People coming in and out. out, a delivery driver, a couple walking their dog, normal, everyday stuff. Then, at 7:42 p.m., about 10 minutes before I got home, a man entered through the side door near the garage. He was wearing a gray hoodie, hat pulled low, face turned away from the cameras. I watched as he walked right past the front desk, slow and casual, like he belonged there, like he knew the building. He didn't go to the elevators. Instead, he stopped by the mailroom and just stood there for nearly 10 minutes, not checking mail, not looking at his phone, just standing in the corner waiting for me. And then at 7:51, right after I walked in through the main doors, he left. He turned and walked out, hands in his hoodie pocket, head still down. I felt cold all over. Jacob rewound the footage, trying to get a better angle, but the guy never showed his face. "You recognize him?" he asked. I swallowed hard. No, the hoodie was different, but something about the way he moved, the way he stood so still, so patiently, it felt the same. I don't know, I admit it. What I think it's him. Jacob immediately called building security. They checked the side doors logs, but nothing. No key fob entry, which meant someone let him in, but no tenants were seen entering before him. No one held the door open. No one was anywhere near that entrance when he walked in. He had just appeared. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've been staying with a friend, too scared to go back to my own apartment. I've changed my number. I've filed another police report, but there's not much they can do without a face, without a name. And last night, I got another text from another unknown number. "You can switch apartments, change your number, throw away your old life. It won't matter. I always find you." This happened about a year ago when I went on a solo trip to the mountains for some much needed peace and quiet. I had booked a remote Airbnb, a small, rustic cabin about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. It was cozy, with a fireplace, old wooden furniture, and a huge bay window that looked out over the valley below. There was no Wi-Fi, no TV, and barely any cell service. At the time, that was exactly what I wanted. The first night was uneventful. I read by the fire, had some wine, and listened to the wind howl outside. But the second night was when things got weird. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a loud thump from the living room. Half asleep, I brushed it off as the old cabin settling, but then I heard another noise, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound stopped. The cabin was completely silent, except for the wind outside. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch had hit the roof, or maybe it was an animal outside. But then I heard it again. Thump, drag. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping toward the bedroom door. The moment I peeked into the living room, my stomach dropped. The armchair by the fireplace had moved. It had been facing the fire when I went to bed, but now it was turned slightly, just enough that if someone sat in it, they'd be staring directly at the hallway leading to my bedroom. I stood there frozen, my flashlight beam shaking. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. There was no one in the cabin but me. I forced myself to check every room, every corner, even outside on the porch. Nothing. No footprints in the fresh snow. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I tried to go back to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing someone or something sitting in that chair, watching my bedroom door. The next morning, I decided to leave a day early. I packed up fast and barely even ate breakfast. Before heading out, I took one last look around the cabin to make sure I hadn't left anything, and that's when I saw it. On the wooden coffee table, right next to the chair, was a single, perfect handprint in the dust. Not mine. I left that cabin so fast I barely remembered to grab my keys. The road back to town was windy and covered in patches of ice, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. But the whole drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something sitting in the back seat. Of course, it was empty, but the feeling didn't go away. I made it to town and checked into a small motel near a gas station. It was old and a little dingy, but at least it wasn't that cabin. I double locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, and told myself I'd be fine. I wasn't fine. That night, I woke up again 2 a.m. just like before. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. Thump, drag. My blood ran cold. The sound wasn't coming from the cabin anymore. It was coming from inside my motel room. I bolted upright and grabbed my phone. The chair I had wedged under the door was still in place. The door was locked, but the sound was there, right in the darkness with me. I turned on my flashlight, hard hammering. The room looked normal. The tiny table by the window, the dresser, the mirror, nothing had moved. But something felt off. I swung my feet to the floor, my breath shallow. That's when I noticed the mirror. It faced the bed directly across from me, and in its reflection, the chair was turned. Not the chair in my room, the one in the cabinet. I stared at the reflection, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The chair, the fireplace, even the same old wooden coffee table. It was as if the mirror was showing me a place I wasn't in anymore. And then something moved in the reflection. A figure, tall, thin, and rugged. It stepped into view, slow and deliberate. I couldn't see its face. It was like a shadow, stretched and distorted, but it was looking at me. I knew it was looking at me. I spun around. Nothing was there. Just my motel room, empty and silent. I turned back to the mirror. The chair was facing forward again. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and ran out of that room as fast as I could. I didn't even bother checking out. I just got in my car and drove straight home. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep. I kept my mirrors covered, my closet door shut tight. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling that someone was watching me. Then, one morning, I found something outside my apartment door. A single, perfect handprint. Not on the doorknob, not on the belt, on the floor. After finding the handprint outside my apartment door, I seriously considered moving. But where would I go? If this thing could follow me from the cabin to the motel, what was stopping it from following me anywhere? For months, I lived in a state of constant fear. Every night, I triple-checked my locks, covered my mirrors, and made sure my curtains were drawn tight. I started sleeping with the light on, something I hadn't done since I was a kid, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it was over. I was wrong. It happened again last week. I was home, watching TV on my couch, when my phone screen suddenly lit up beside me. An airdrop request. That was weird. I never left my airdrop open. Even weirder, it was coming from a device named CMA. The cold chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. I should have ignored it. I know I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I accepted the file. It was a photo, and when I opened it, my whole body locked up. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch. Right that second, the angle was from behind me, like someone, or something, was standing just outside my living room window. I turned immediately, heart pounding. The curtains were shut tight. I jumped up, grabbed a kitchen knife, and slowly, so slowly, pulled one side of the curtain open. Nothing. There was no one out there. No footprints in the snow. No sign of anyone at all. I slammed the curtain shut and checked my phone again. The airdropped file was gone, completely erased from my device, like it had never been there in the first place. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something standing at my window, just beyond the glass, watching, waiting. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to get help. I spent the day researching paranormal investigators, but every website I found felt sketchy. Eventually, I called my friend Mark. He's one of those guys who's into all things weird. Ghosts, cryptids, urban legends. If anyone would know what to do, it was him. He showed up that evening with a duffel bag full of gear, EMF meters, thermal cameras, even a little pouch of what he claimed was blessed salt. "You're lucky I believe you," he said, grinning. "Most people would think you're losing your mind." I almost laughed. Maybe I was. We started in the living room. He scanned the place with his EMF reader, but nothing happened. No spikes, no strange energy, nothing. Then we moved to my bedroom. The moment he stepped inside, his meter went crazy. It beeped rapidly, the reading spiking into the red. He muttered a curse under his breath and pulled out his thermal camera. "I think something's here, man," he whispered. He aimed the camera at the closet. At first, the screen showed nothing but the normal heat signatures of the room. But then, something flickered, a faint shape, tall, too tall. It was standing inside my closet. Holy shit, Mark breathed. "Do you see that?" I saw it. I saw it move. Before I could react, the closet door slammed shut on its own. The EMF meter shrieked. My bedroom light flickered violently, and for a brief second, the room felt wrong, like the air was thicker, heavier. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The EMF meter went silent. The light stopped flickering. The temperature in the room returned to normal. Mark and I stared at each other, both breathing hard. "Dude," he finally said, "I think you need to leave." That was 5 days ago. I'm staying with Mark now. I haven't been back to my apartment. I don't think I ever will, because last night, as I was lying awake in his guest room, I got another airdrop request. This time, it was a video. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. The footage was grainy, shaky, like it had been recorded in a dark room, but I recognized it immediately. It was my apartment. The camera moved slowly through my living room, down the hall, into my bedroom. It stopped at my closet door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the door creaked open, and in the dim light, I saw it. Then, smiling, the video ended. I was working late at my office in a high-rise downtown. The company occupied floors 14 through 18, and I was on the 16th floor, finishing up some reports. By the time I was done, it was well past midnight. The office was dead silent, and the only sound was the faint hum of the AC. I grabbed my things and headed toward the elevators. The hallway was eerily empty, lit only by the dim emergency lights. I pressed the call button, and soon enough, the elevator dinged and the doors slid open. I stepped inside and hit the button for the lobby. The doors closed smoothly, and I leaned against the wall, exhausted. The elevator started descending normally, but then it didn't stop. I expected the soft jolt of arrival when it reached the lobby, but instead, the numbers on the panel kept going down. D1, D2, D3. I frowned. Our building only had 2 basement levels. Then the doors slid open, and beyond them was nothing but complete darkness. Not a dimly lit parking garage, not a maintenance area, just blackness like the elevator had opened into a void. A rush of cold air swept inside, bringing with it a smell I can only describe as old, like rotting wood and damp stone. I reached out instinctively to press the door close button, but before I could, something moved in the darkness. I didn't see it, not fully, but I felt it. The presence of something large, something watching me. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air felt thick, pressing in on me like unseen hands. Then, the elevator doors began closing on their own. The second they shut, the elevator shot upward so fast my stomach lurched. It bypassed the lobby entirely and stopped at the 16th floor, where I had just come from. The doors slid open to reveal the empty, silent office space. I didn't question it. I took the stairs down all 16 floors, not stopping until I burst out into the cool night air. I never used that elevator again, and after that night, I started hearing stories from other employees, things about the basement levels, about doors that didn't lead anywhere, and about the janitor who had gone missing years ago after taking that same elevator down late one night. A few days after my experience with the elevator, I tried to put it out of my mind. I convinced myself I had been overworked, exhausted, maybe even dreaming. But then, little things started happening that made me question everything. It started with the mirrors. In the office bathroom, I noticed my reflection lagging just a fraction of a second behind my movements. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless I stared too long. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then one night, as I washed my hands, my reflection smiled at me. I had it smiled. I bolted out of the bathroom so fast I nearly tripped. Then came the emails. One night, while catching up on work, my inbox dinged with a new message. It was from an address I didn't recognize. No subject, no message, just an attachment, a photo. It was grainy and dark, but I could make out a hallway that looked eerily familiar. After adjusting the brightness, my stomach dropped. It was the 16th floor, taken from the perspective of someone standing in the elevator. I swiveled in my chair and looked toward the elevators at the end of the dimly lit hallway. The doors were shut. Nothing seemed out of place, but something about the angle of that photo. It was like someone or something had been watching me. I deleted the email and shut down my computer. I wasn't staying there any longer, but the worst happened at home. I had started sleeping with my bedroom door closed, something I'd never done before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. The air in my apartment felt different, like I was never alone. One night, I woke up to the sound of my closet door creaking open. In the darkness, I could just make out the faint outline of the door, now slightly ajar. My chest tightened. I knew for a fact I had shut it before bed. Then I heard it, a quiet, slow exhale, not from me, from inside the closet. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The room felt wrong, like the air had thickened around me. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the closet. Nothing, just my clothes hanging limply, shadows pooling at the bottom. But I swear, for just a second, I saw the darkness shift, like something had just moved back into it. That was the last straw. The next morning, I put in my 2 weeks notice. I didn't care about the job, the pay, or the promotions. I just needed out. The day I left, I took the stairs one final time. As I reached the bottom, curiosity got the better of me. I turned to look at the elevator panel. The light above one of the elevators flickered. It was moving, descending. I watched as it went past the lobby, down into B1, B2. Then, for the first time since that night, it kept going. B3, B4, B5. I turned and walked out of that building without looking back. I still don't know what was in that elevator. I still don't know what watched me from my closet. I moved out of my apartment a week later. I didn't tell my landlord the real reason. Just said I was relocating for work and paid the early termination fee. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted distance between me and whatever had latched onto me after that elevator ride. For a while, I thought I was safe. I started a new job in a different part of the city, rented a smaller place in a high rise that I made sure had no basement levels. But then, the calls started. At first, they were just empty. Late at night, my phone would vibrate on my nightstand, and I'd groggily check the screen. Unknown caller. Every time I picked up, there was nothing on the other end. Just silence. No breathing. No static. Just dead air. Then, one night, something changed. I picked up the call out of frustration. "Hello," I whispered, barely awake. This time, there was breathing, slow, shallow. Then, in a voice that sounded far too familiar, I heard, "Why did you leave?" My entire body went rigid. The voice, it was mine. I hung up immediately, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, but deep down, I knew better. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't even human. I stopped answering the calls after that, blocked every unknown number that popped up, but that didn't stop it, because then it found another way to reach me. It was a Friday night, and I was coming home late from work. My new building had strict security, key fobs for every floor, cameras in every hallway. I felt safe here. At least, I did until that night. I stepped into the elevator alone, hit the button for my floor, and leaned back against the wall, exhausted. The doors were just about to close when a hand suddenly shot through the gap. A man stepped in. He was tall, thin, dressed in a suit that looked a little too stiff, like he hadn't moved in a while. But it wasn't his appearance that set off alarm bells in my head. It was his face, because he didn't have one. I don't mean it was blurry or obscured, I mean it was completely smooth. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a featureless expanse of skin. I froze. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. The door slid shut, and suddenly the air in the elevator turned thick. He didn't move, didn't press a button, he just stood there, facing me. Then he tilted his head, not like he was confused, not like he was curious, but like he was studying me. The elevator continued its slow ascent. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to do something, but there was nowhere to go. The floor numbers kept rising. 8, 9, 10. The man in the suit started to smile, only he didn't have a mouth, so the skin where his lips should have been just stretched, like something underneath was pressing against it, trying to break through. 11, 12. The lights flickered, the air grew colder. He took a step toward me. 13. The elevator stopped. The door slid open, but it wasn't my floor. It wasn't a floor at all. It was the same darkness from the basement. And this time, something was waiting for me inside. I felt it before I saw it. That same broadness, that same crushing, suffocating presence. I didn't think. I just acted. I slammed my fist against the closed door button over and over, heart pounding, my entire body shaking. The faceless man stood completely still, like he was waiting for me to step out. The doors shut. The elevator rocketed upward. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The faceless man was gone. The doors finally opened on my floor, and I ran. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I asked security if they had seen anything strange on the cameras. They pulled up the footage, and that's when I learned the worst part. I was alone in that elevator the entire time. This happened a few years ago when I was living alone in a small house just outside of town. It was one of those older homes with a lot of character, creaky floors, doors that never quite shut all the way, and a single, eerie attic that I never used. I should mention that I'm not the type to scare easily. I like horror movies, I've gone ghost hunting with friends for fun, and I've lived alone for a long time. But this shook me to my core. It started with small things. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Lights left on that I was sure I had turned off. The TV on a different channel than what I had left it on. My keys were where I swore I had placed them. The classic living alone paranoia, right? That's what I told myself. Then came the noises. At night, as I lay in bed, I would hear what sounded like faint shuffling from the attic above me. Not loud, not urgent, just the softest sound of something moving. I rationalized it as an animal. Maybe a raccoon had found its way in. Maybe it was just the house settling. But then, things escalated. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the distinct sound of footsteps directly above me. Slow, deliberate, face-up, my breath caught in my throat. I lay frozen in bed, listening. It was unmistakable. Someone was walking in my attic. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the sound was too clear. I gathered the courage to get up, grab the bat I kept by my bedside, and make my way to the attic entrance in the hallway. The pull-down ladder creaked as I reached up and yanked the cord. The attic was empty. No animals, no intruders, nothing. Just dust and old insulation. But the air felt rugged. I shut the attic and convinced myself I was losing it. Until the next morning, that's when I saw it. The attic door was open, wide open. I locked my bedroom door that night, and the next, and the next. I didn't hear anything for a few nights, and I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I had just imagined it, and I was psyching myself out. But then, about a week later, something happened that made me leave that house for good. I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed, when I heard a creaking noise from the hallway. I turned around. The attic ladder was down, and someone was standing halfway down it. I didn't see a face, just a figure, crouched in the darkness, peering at me from the attic. attic. I didn't stop to grab anything. I ran out of that house, barefoot and in my pajamas, and drove straight to my friend's place. I never went back alone. My brother came with me the next day to grab my stuff, but we found nothing. No one was there. The attic door was shut. The ladder was up. A month after I left that house, I moved into a newer apartment on the other side of town. No attic, no crawl spaces, no strange noises, just a simple one bedroom with locked doors and neighbors close by. It took a while for me to shake the paranoia, but eventually I settled in, or so I thought. About 2 months after I moved, I was having a normal night at home, watching TV, eating takeout, nothing unusual. Then, as I got up to throw my food away, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The attic. My old attic key was sitting on my kitchen counter. I never took it with me when I moved. I left it behind in that house. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it got mixed in with my things by accident. Maybe my brother grabbed it when we packed up my stuff. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I never took that key. I threw it away immediately. I didn't even want to touch it. I tossed it in the dumpster outside and tried to put it out of my mind. That night, I had the worst nightmare I've ever had. I was back at my old house, standing under the attic. The ladder was down, but I couldn't see inside. Just a yawning, endless darkness stretching far beyond where the attic should have ended. Something was in there. I couldn't see it, but I could hear breathing. Slow, ragged, and deliberate. Then, in my dream, something stepped forward. A figure, and possibly tall, its limbs just a little too long, its movements not quite human. It started climbing down toward me. I woke up gasping for air. I tried to shake it off as just a nightmare, but then, a few nights later, it got worse. I came home from work late, exhausted. As I unlocked my apartment door, I noticed something strange. My bedroom light was on. I always turned it off before leaving. I hesitated. My heart started pounding. I slowly stepped inside. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. My bedroom closet was open. I never leave it open, ever. Inside, the attic key was sitting on the top shelf. I moved out the next week. I don't know how it followed me or if it ever really left, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear it again, soft, deliberate footsteps above me. I never stay in one place for too long anymore. After the incident with the attic key showing up in my new apartment, I moved again. A friend of mine worked in real estate and managed to find me a small but modern studio in a high-rise building downtown. It had no attic, no weird crawl spaces, no strange history. For the first time in a long time, I actually felt safe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. I could still feel it, and things were fine for the first few weeks. No noises, no keys appearing where they shouldn't be. Then one night, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something strange. I had a full-length mirror in my bedroom, just a cheap one I got from Target, leaning against the wall. As I walked past it, I felt an odd sense of hesitation, like something in the reflection wasn't quite right. I stopped and turned to look. It was normal, just me, standing there, looking tired. But then I saw it. In the reflection, the closet door behind me was slightly open. I spun around. It was closed. I looked back at the mirror. It was open again. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I slowly stepped toward the closet, heart pounding, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Maybe I was just exhausted. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I reached out and pulled the closet door open. Nothing. Empty. I took a shaky breath, closed the closet, and turned back to the mirror. The closet door and the reflection was still open, and this time, I saw something standing inside. I barely slept that night. I told myself the mirror was just a trick of the light, that I was overtired, that I was letting my paranoia get the best of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. A few nights later, I found out I was right. It was just past 2 a.m. when I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Nelk. It was coming from inside my closet. I sat up in bed, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at the closed door, willing it to be my imagination. Then it happened again. Nelk. Slow, methodical, almost playful. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the closet door. Nothing. Silence. I don't know how long I sat there, waiting, but eventually the sun started to rise. And when I finally worked up the nerve to open the closet, I saw something that nearly made me collapse. Sitting on the floor, right in the middle of the empty closet, was the attic key. I didn't waste time. I packed a bag, called my friend, and told her I was leaving. I didn't care where, I just needed to be somewhere else. But as I grabbed my things and headed toward the door, something stopped me cold. My apartment door was locked, not from the inside, from the outside. Someone had locked me in. Panic surged through me. I yanked on the handle. I banged on the door, shouting for help. But my building was quiet. No one heard me. Then, behind me, I heard it. Click. The sound of the closet door slowly opening. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stared at the locked door in front of me, feeling the weight of something watching me from inside that closet. Then a whisper right behind me, "You can't leave." I don't know how I got out. I don't remember unlocking the door. The next thing I knew, I was outside, running. I didn't go back for my stuff. I didn't ask questions. I just ran. Now, I move constantly. I never stay in one place for more than a few months. I avoid mirrors. I don't use closets. I don't ever live in a place with an attic. But no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I still hear it sometimes. The knocking, the whispering, and once, just once, in the middle of the night, I woke up to find something sitting on my nightstand. The attic key. I threw it out the window. I lived off campus in a rundown house that I rented with 2 other students, Jake and Laura. It wasn't a bad place, just old, with a weird layout and creaky floors. The kind of place that makes noise even when nobody's moving. One night, I was alone in the house. Jake had gone to visit his parents, and Laura was out with friends. It was around midnight, and I was sitting on the couch, watching TV with a bowl of popcorn. The only light in the room came from the screen, casting flickering shadows on the walls. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not from the front door, but from inside the house. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft, deliberate taps. I muted the TV and sat up, my heart already racing. It had come from down the hall, near the back bedroom. That was Laura's room, but I knew she wasn't home. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the house settling, maybe my imagination. I turned the volume back up, then it happened again. 3 knocks, but this time, closer. I stood up, straining to listen. The air felt heavier, like the atmosphere before a storm. I swallowed hard and called out, "Hello?" No answer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, slowly making my way toward the hallway. The floor creaked under my feet, but there was no other movement. I reached Laura's door and pushed it open, expecting, I don't know what, but the room was empty. Then I heard the knock again. Behind me, I spun around, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The sound had come from the bathroom door. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, I reached for the doorknob and turned it. The bathroom was empty, nothing out of place, no windows open, no sign that anyone had been there. At this point, every instinct was screaming at me to leave the house, but I had no real reason to. I mean, there was no one there, so I did the next best thing. I locked my bedroom door, climbed under the covers like a child, and tried to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up suddenly. The room was pitch black, except for the faint glow of my phone charging on the nightstand. I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it again. 3 soft knocks, this time on my bedroom door. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. My phone was right beside me, but I was too afraid to reach for it. I wanted to call someone, Laura, Jake, the police, anyone, but I was terrified that if I made a sound, whatever was on the other side of the door would know I was awake. The knocking didn't come again. I don't remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, some light was streaming through my blinds. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me. That afternoon, when Laura got home, I told her what happened. She listened, her face growing paler by the second. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "I hear knocking too," she whispered, "but only when I'm in the shower." After we moved out, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I never told Jake about it. He would have just laughed it off. But Laura and I didn't joke about it. We didn't talk about it at all. I wish I could say that was the end of it. The few months after we moved, I was crashing at my parents' place for the summer. One night, I woke up to the sound of knocking. 3 soft taps. I sat up so fast that my vision blurred. My heart was hammering in my chest, my body already tense with that old, awful fear. But I wasn't in the house anymore. I was in my childhood bedroom, a place that had never scared me before. I held my breath and listened, silent. I told myself I had imagined it, maybe a dream, a leftover fear from that awful house. But I still got up, turned on the lights, and checked the hallway. My parents were asleep. The house was quiet. I barely slept that night. The next day, I convinced myself it was nothing, just my mind played tricks on me, until it happened again. This time, I was in the shower. I was rinsing shampoo out of my hair when I heard it. 3 soft knocks on the bathroom door. My stomach turned to ice. The sound was unmistakable. I stood there, frozen, water running down my face. Then I called, "Dad." No answer. I shut the water off and listened, my pulse thudding in my ears. Nothing. Wrapping a towel around myself, I stepped out of the shower and yanked open the door. The hallway was empty. The house was completely still. I checked my parents' room, but they were sound asleep. I didn't sleep that night either. I hadn't talked to Laura in a while. Life got busy and we both moved on. But after the second knocking incident at my parents' house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I texted her door. Hey, weird question. Have you had anything strange happen since we left the house? She took a while to reply. When she did, it was just one sentence. I hear it at night. I stared at the message, dread curling in my gut. We ended up talking on the phone, and what she told me made me feel sick. She had moved into a small apartment with a new roommate, but the knocking had followed her. Always 3 knocks, always at night, sometimes on the bathroom door, sometimes on her bedroom door, sometimes, worst of all, on her closet. She tried ignoring it, but it kept happening. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, she admitted, but then my roommate heard it too. That was the last time we really talked about it. For a long time, I managed to convince myself it was over, that whatever had followed me and Laura from that cursed house had finally lost interest. I even joked about it once with her over text. Hey, still getting creepy knocks at night and faced with tears of joy. Laura, nope, being quiet for a while. Phew, we say, maybe it finally got bored of us. Laura, good, let's not jinx it. I should have listened to her, because not even a week after that, it happened again. This time, it was different. I was living alone by then, in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a new building. Modern yet bright, the kind of place where nothing bad should happen. I had just settled into bed, scrolling my phone, when I heard it. 3 knocks, soft and deliberate, coming from my front door. My stomach clenched. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was nearly 2 a.m. I lay there, my heart pounding. My apartment had a peephole, but I was too afraid to check. Instead, I just waited, barely breathing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just someone knocking on the wrong door. I told myself those things, but then, the 4th knock. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. It had never knocked 4 times before. It had always been 3. Always. This was different. Something about that extra knock sent a bolt of pure, ice-cold fear through me. Like a warning. Like it was saying, I know you're still there. I know you're listening. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I worked up the courage to creep out of bed and check the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I double-checked that my door was locked, then sat on my couch, wide awake until morning. I didn't text Laura right away. I didn't want to freak her out. But a few days later, when I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, I caved. Weird thing happened. I got the knocks again, but this time, there was a 4th one. She didn't respond for hours. When she finally did, it was short. Laura, don't answer it. That was the last time I heard from her. I tried reaching out, but she never replied. Her number stopped working. Her social media disappeared. I even called her old roommate, but she had moved out months ago and hadn't spoken to Laura since. I don't know where she went. I don't know what happened to her, but I do know one thing. I haven't heard the knocking again. This happened when I was 14, and I still can't explain it. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and houses stay in families for generations. My best friend, Rachel, lived in an old Victorian house that had been her great-grandmother's. It was one of those houses that always felt a little too dim inside, even in the middle of the day. One summer, Rachel and I were hanging out at her place while their parents were out. We were watching TV in the living room when we both noticed it at the same time, a low humming sound. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe someone mowing their lawn a few houses down. But when I muted the TV, the hum stayed. It wasn't loud, just persistent, like an electrical buzz, but deeper, almost like someone humming a tune just under their breath. Rachel frowned. You hear that, right? I nodded. Yeah, what is it? She looked uncomfortable. It happens sometimes. That was weird. I had been to her house hundreds of times, and I had never noticed anything like this. We got up to investigate. The hum seemed to come from everywhere at once, but when we moved toward the staircase, it got louder. Not unbearably loud, but noticeable, like we were getting closer to the source. Rachel hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. It's probably just the pipes or something, she mumbled, but I could tell she didn't believe that. I stepped onto the first stair. The hum deepened, vibrating through the wooden banister. I climbed a few more steps, and it got louder, not deafening, but insistent, like it knew I was coming closer. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I felt it inside my chest, like a second heartbeat. Rachel was still at the bottom, watching me. Then the hum changed. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a voice, low, drawn out, words stretching like someone trying to speak underwater. Who is that? I froze. Rachel let out a gasp. Come back down. But I was frozen in place because now, right in front of me, at the end of the hallway, a door was opening. Rachel's house had 4 bedrooms, and I had been in all of them before. Lit this door. It shouldn't have been there. The humming was coming from inside. I didn't want to move, but I also didn't want to stay. I turned and bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my panic. Rachel grabbed my arm arm and yanked me into the kitchen. We stood there, breathing hard, listening. The hub was gone. I wanted to ask her about it, about the voice, the door, everything, but she just shook her head and whispered, "We don't go upstairs when it happens." I never spent the night at her house again. A year later, her parents sold the place and moved across town. We never talked about it, but one time, when we were both a little older, I asked Rachel if she ever saw that door again. She didn't answer right away. Then she just said it was gone the next day. A few years went by, and I tried to forget about what had happened in Rachel's house. But some things stick with you, no matter how much you try to convince yourself it was just a weird trick of sound or overactive imagination. Rachel and I stayed close, but we didn't talk about it again. Not until years later, when we were in our 20s, sitting around a campfire with a group of friends, swapping creepy stories. Someone brought up a house in town that had been abandoned for a long time, the same house Rachel had lived in. Apparently, the new owners had never stayed more than a few months before moving out. The last family didn't even bother selling it, they just left. I glanced at Rachel, expecting her to look uncomfortable, but instead, she looked tired. "I used to live there," she finally said. That got everyone's attention. I could tell she didn't want to talk about it, but maybe after all these years, she felt like she needed to. She took a sip of her drink and stared into the fire. "You remember the humming, right?" she asked me. I nodded, my stomach twisting. She let out a slow breath. "It never stopped." Rachel explained that after the night we heard the voice, things got worse. The humming wasn't just occasional anymore. It started happening more often. At first, only at night, then during the day. And the door, the one I had seen at the top of the stairs, it came back. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't want them to think she was crazy. But she started waking up to find the door open, just a crack. Sometimes, she swore she saw something standing behind it. Not a person, not a shadow, just something. And the voice, it learned her name. The last night she ever spent in that house, she woke up to a different sound. Not humming, tapping, slow, rhythmic, coming from inside the walls. She lay frozen in bed, heart pounding. Then, clear as day, she heard a whisper, low and stretched out, like before. I said, "You." That was enough. She ran to her parents' room, sobbing, begging them to leave. That was the night they decided to sell the house. As she finished her story, everyone around the campfire was dead silent. Then one of our friends, Mark, spoke up. "That's weird," he said, frowning. "I went in there once, just to mess around, before they boarded it up." Rachel and I exchanged a glance. Mark swallowed hard, looking at the fire instead of us. "I heard it, too." "The humming?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, the whisper." Mark's words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt Rachel tense beside me. The fire crackled, but nobody spoke. The night air felt heavier. You're serious?" Rachel finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded. He looked genuinely shaken, like he hadn't planned on admitting it out loud. "I was just messing around," he said. "It was a dare. A couple of us snuck in through the back window. The place was empty, no furniture, nothing. Just dust and that weird, stale smell old houses have. But then, I heard it. That low hum, almost like a power line buzzing, but deeper. Felt it in my chest." Rachel was staring at him, her face pale. And then, Mark continued, "I got to the top of the stairs, and there was a door at the end of the hall. I swear, it wasn't there when we first went up, but it was just there, like it had always been. I felt a chill run down my spine." Mark sweated hard. I walked toward it, and that's when I heard the voice. Right behind me, he took a breath, his eyes darting around the circle, almost like he was checking to see if something was listening. It said, "Who is that?" I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled. Rachel looked sick. "You opened the door, didn't you?" she asked. Mark hesitated, and then, slowly, he nodded. "It was just a room," he said, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Empty, except for this." He paused, looked at Rachel. "This chair." Rachel let out a shaky breath. It was the first time I'd seen real fear on her face. "What did it look like?" she asked. "Oh, one of those rocking chairs." It was facing the corner, like someone had been sitting there, looking at the wall. But the thing is, Mark looked down at his hands, like he was trying to keep them from shaking. It was moving, just barely, like someone had just stood up. Nobody said anything. Then, quietly, Rachel spoke. It rocked for days after we moved out. Mark's face drained of color. I felt my skin crawl. Rachel rubbed her arms, like she was suddenly cold. We packed everything, but when we left, the chair was still in that room. My mom thought it belonged to the previous owners. She told my dad to get rid of it, but he kept forgetting. She looked at me. "You remember how fast we left?" I nodded. "We were out in a day. The movers didn't even go upstairs." She exhaled. "We never got rid of it." I swallowed hard. "So it's still there." Rachel shook her head. "The family that moved in after us, they tried to get rid of it, took it out to the curb, even set it on fire in the backyard." She paused, but the next morning, he was back in that room. A long silence. Mark's voice was barely audible. "And then what?" Rachel didn't blink. "They left." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air. For the first time since we started telling stories, days. I wanted to go home. Rachel took a deep breath and stood up. I'm done talking about it. We didn't try to stop her. I think we all realized something at the same time. Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. This happened about 3 years ago when I moved into my first apartment alone. It was an older building, but the rent was cheap, and I was just excited to have my own space. I had a job that required late nights, so I'd often come home around 2 or 3 a.m. when the world was silent. The first time I heard it, I thought I was imagining things. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, when a faint voice drifted through the air vent near my ceiling. It was muffled, almost like it was coming from another apartment, but something about it made my skin crawl. At first, it was just whispering, indistinct and almost rhythmic, but then I heard my name. I bolted upright. Did I imagine that? I muttered to myself. The voice stopped. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just exhaustion, maybe a neighbor talking in their sleep. But then it happened again the next night. This time, I pressed my ear against the vent. The whispering continued, just beyond comprehension, like someone mumbling through gritted teeth. And then, clear as day, you can hear me now, can't you? I jumped back so fast I nearly fell off the bed. My heart pounded. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the vent, waiting for more. But the voice didn't return. The next morning, I went to my landlord. I asked if the vents connected between apartments, if it was possible to hear someone else speaking. He just shrugged. They're old. But no one's lived in the unit next to yours for months. That night, I kept my TV on for background noise, anything to keep the silence at bay. But around 3 a.m., the TV flickered. The screen turned to static for just a second, and in that second, from the vent, I heard it again. A slow, distorted laugh. Then, don't ignore me. I left the apartment that night, packed a bag, and stayed at a friend's. The next day, I told my landlord I was breaking the lease. I didn't care about the penalty. I moved out within a week. I don't know who or what was speaking to me. I don't know if anyone moved into that apartment after me, and I have no plans to ever go back and find out. After I moved out of that apartment, I did my best to convince myself that it had all been in my head. Maybe it was stress, maybe sleep deprivation. I told myself that over and over until I started to believe it. For the next year, everything was normal. No whispery vents, no strange voices, no flickering screens. I had almost forgotten about the whole thing, almost, until last week. It started with something small. I was home alone, working late, when my phone glitched. The screen froze, then flickered, then turned to static. It only lasted a second, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Then, that night, I woke up suddenly, my heart hammering for no reason. The room was silent, still, but something felt off. I turned onto my side, facing the wall, when I heard it. A faint, breathy whisper, not through a vent this time, right next to my ear. I launched out of bed so fast I knocked my nightstand over. My lamp crashed to the floor, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think. I flipped the light on, scanning the room. Nothing, no one. The house was locked, the windows shut, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. It had to be, right? Then, 2 days later, my friend Sarah came over for a movie night. She was in the kitchen grabbing drinks when she called out, her voice weirdly hesitant. Hey, but when did you get a cat? I frowned. I don't have a cat. She walked back into the living room, looking a little pale. I swear I just saw something move down the hall. He was small, like an animal. We both checked every room. Nothing. Then, just as we were about to shrug it off, my TV flickered again. Just a single second of static, and in that brief, flickery moment, I swore I saw something reflected in the screen. A shape, a shadow, standing in the hallway. Sarah left immediately. I don't blame her. That night, I did something I had never done before. I spoke to it. I sat in my bed, staring at the dark corners of the room, and whispered, "What do you want?" For a long time, there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to turn over and try to sleep, I heard it. A breath, a slow, deliberate inhale. Then, right by my ear, I found you. I'm staying at a hotel now. I don't know what to do next. I left that apartment behind. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Something had followed me. I was sure of it now. But how? And why? I checked out of the hotel the next morning, feeling like a fugitive. I needed answers. I needed to know what I was dealing with, so I did the one thing I told myself I'd never do. I went back to my old apartment. It looked the same from the outside. Run down, gray, the kind of place people lived in when they didn't have better options. I stood outside for a long time before finally working up the nerve to knock on the door. A woman answered, mid-30s, tired eyes, the look of someone who regretted moving in. "Sorry to bother you," I said. "I used to live here. I was just wondering, have you noticed anything strange?" Her face changed instantly. "You mean the voices?" A cold, sick feeling curled in my stomach. "Yeah," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She opened the door wider. "Come in." The apartment looked the same, but it felt worse. Heavier, stale. The air was thick, like the walls were watching us. house. The woman, Laura, wasted no time, and they started a week after I moved in, she said, crossing her arms. At first, it was just whispering. I thought it was neighbors. She shook her head. Then it said my name. I swallowed hard. She went on. I told my boyfriend. He thought I was crazy. Then one night, he stayed over. He heard it too. I almost didn't want to ask, but I had to. Did it move? Laura's eyes darkened. The vents. No, but something else. She led me to the bedroom. I saw it in the mirror. She said it was standing right behind me. But when I turned around, it was gone. My stomach twisted. I thought of my TV flickering, of that shadow in the reflection. I needed to get out of there. Did you ever? I started to ask, but I stopped because at that moment, the air changed. The room got colder, and then from the vent, both of our names were whispered. Laura and I bolted. We didn't stop until we were outside, panty like we'd run a marathon. She turned to me, pale as death. I'm moving, she said. I nodded. Me too. That was 2 months ago. Laura left the apartment, but I never found out where she went. I tried calling her once, but her number was disconnected. As for me, I moved across the state into a new building, a new city. For a while, it was quiet, peaceful. Then 2 nights ago, it happened again. I woke up suddenly, feeling watched. The room was dead silent. Then a whisper from the closet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The door was cracked open, a sliver of blackness. Then, in the dark, something shifted. Something stepped out. I didn't stay to see what it was. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and ran. Now, I'm in my car, riding this in a gas station parking lot. I don't know where to go. I don't think running is enough anymore. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. Not after what I saw, or what I almost saw stepping out of my closet. Instead, I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept the gas tank full and the radio on, trying to drown out the silence, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that I was not alone. I told myself that if I just kept moving, I'd be safe. That if I put enough miles between me and whatever this thing was, it would lose me. But deep down, I knew that was a lie, because no matter how far I drove, I started to notice things. The static. Every time I checked into a motel, the TV would flicker. Just once, just for a second. Then came the reflections. At a gas station outside of some nowhere town, I stopped to use the bathroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed, washing everything in a sickly yellow. I washed my hands, splashing water on my face, trying to shake the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. Then I looked up. In the mirror, over my shoulder, something moved. I spun around. Nothing. But in the reflection, the stall door behind me was slowly swinging open. I ran. Didn't even stop to dry my hands. Didn't stop until I was back on the highway, breath coming in ragged gasps. It was getting closer. Last night, I broke down. Not my car, me. I parked at the edge of a rest stop and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Then, for the first time in weeks, I spoke to it. I know you're there. Silence. You followed me. You want something. The radio crackled. The engine clicked softly in the cold. Then, a breath, right in my ear. I turned so fast my vision blurred. The passenger seat was empty, but I felt it. Something was in the car with me. What do you want? I yelled, voice shaking. For a long time, nothing, just the hum of the road, the wind against the windows. Then, from the radio, distorted, warped, like a voice dragged through static. Let me in. The engine roared as I floored the gas, speeding down the empty highway. I don't know what it means. I don't know how to stop it, but I do know one thing. I've been running for weeks, running from my apartment, from the vents, from the shadows and the reflection, and now I finally understand. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.